She heard 6 words through a closed door. 6 words that shattered 3 years of quiet devotion in under 4 seconds. Charlotte Hayes stood frozen in the corridor outside Vincent DeLuca's private office. Her knuckles raised mid-knock, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. Inside, she heard his voice, low, measured, absolute. The voice that had guided million-dollar decisions, silenced rival families, and somehow, in the small hours of certain evenings, made her believe she mattered in ways no job description could capture. She will become my future wife. And then Victoria laughed, soft, warm, the laugh of a woman who already knew the ending. Charlotte lowered her hand. She turned around. She walked back down the corridor with her spine straight and her face completely empty, because 3 years working beside Vincent DeLuca had taught her exactly one survival skill. Never let them see the damage while it's still happening. The document stayed in her hands, undelivered. Her resignation letter would be updated by morning. If you've ever loved someone in silence so long, the silence starts to feel permanent. Stay with this story. Subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels, and I promise you, you will not see this ending coming. The morning. Charlotte Hayes had decided to destroy her own career began like every other morning for the past 3 years, with black coffee, a silk blouse ironed to geometric precision, and the quiet, deliberate ritual of becoming the woman Vincent DeLuca's empire required her to be. She arrived at DeLuca Tower 40 minutes before her official start time. She always did. Not because anyone demanded it, not because it appeared in her contract, but because those 40 minutes belonged to her in a way the rest of the day did not. She could sit at her desk while the building was still half asleep and simply breathe without anyone needing anything, without the weight of Vincent's schedule pressing against every inhale. That particular Tuesday, she sat longer than usual. The resignation letter existed only in her head at that point. A structure, a shape. 3 years of accumulated professionalism already pre-sorting itself into a formal 2-week notice, a gracious handover document, and the careful, deliberate erasure of Charlotte Hayes from the daily operations of an organization that had, she understood now, never really needed her heart, only her competence. She opened her laptop. She found the old draft she had written once before, 2 years ago, when Vincent had spent 8 days in Rome without a single update, and she had been forced to confront, in the loneliest possible way, that missing someone who doesn't know you're missing them is its own particular variety of humiliation. She had never sent it. She had been too good at her job and, if she was honest, too unwilling to walk away from the daily proximity of a man who made her feel like she was standing slightly closer to the sun than everyone else. She read 3 paragraphs of the old letter. Then she closed the laptop. Not yet. After the gala. The DeLuca Foundation Charity Gala was 7 days away. She had spent 11 months organizing it. The venue, the guest lists, the menu, the program, the seating arrangements for a room that would hold some of the most powerful people in New York, and several who should not be seated within eye line of each other for political reasons. She had memorized the way other people memorized their own phone numbers. She would not abandon it. That was not who she was. She would finish the job, and then she would disappear. Vincent arrived at 8:14, which was 3 minutes later than his usual time, and Charlotte noticed because she noticed everything about him, which was the particular curse of loving someone who occupied the same professional space as you for 40-plus hours every week. He wore charcoal gray. The jacket sat slightly wrong across his left shoulder. He'd grabbed it quickly, probably from the car. He had the look of a man who had been awake at 4 in the morning and had decided somewhere around 5 to simply accept it. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was perfect. She had practiced this particular version of her voice all through the elevator ride up. Charlotte. He paused at the threshold of his office the way he sometimes did. Not dramatic, not deliberate, just a half-second hesitation she had learned to read as the moment he was actually registering the room he was walking into, rather than simply moving through it on autopilot. The Carducci file. Did Mancini send the revised projections? Last night at 11. Already in your folder. I flagged the 3rd section. There's a discrepancy in the acquisition figures that legal needs to address before Thursday. Right. He glanced at her, just briefly. Good catch. 3 years ago, that would have been enough. 2 years ago, it still felt like something. Now she just nodded and returned to her monitor, and the distance between them across 20 feet of office space felt architectural, load-bearing, designed that way. She had loved him quietly for so long it had started to feel like a structural feature of her personality. She did not dramatize this to herself. She was not a woman who indulged melodrama over facts. The fact was simple. She had fallen for Vincent DeLuca somewhere during the second month of her employment, somewhere between watching him dismantle a corrupt business arrangement in 45 minutes flat, with nothing but a telephone and a calm voice. And the night he had shown up unannounced at a foundation fundraiser, she was running solo because 3 staff members had called in sick and simply rolled up his sleeves and helped her move tables without saying a word about it. She had not intended to fall. She had fought it, actually, with the energy of someone who understood perfectly well that wanting something you cannot have is just a slower form of grief. But the heart doesn't negotiate. And for 3 years, she had managed the unmanageable, performing the professional while protecting the personal, because she was good at her job and she respected him, and the alternative was leaving, which was the one thing she had never been able to make herself do. Until yesterday. The conference room on the 14th floor had a particular acoustic quality that the architects had probably not anticipated when they installed the glass wall facing the corridor. Sound moved strangely there. The shape of the adjoining hallway created a channel so that conversations inside the outer office sometimes arrived in the corridor more fully than intended, especially when a door was left half open. Charlotte had been walking toward Vincent's private office with a folder of documents that required his physical signature, not email authorization, actual ink, because the Hartley contract was the kind of agreement his legal team had explicitly specified needed to be handled in person. She had not been eavesdropping. She wanted to be clear about this, at least to herself. She had not pressed her ear to a door. She had not loitered or strained to listen. She had simply turned the corner, raised her hand to knock, and heard him, mid-sentence, clear as anything. "She will become my future wife." Then silence. Then Victoria Collins laughing, that warm, open sound Charlotte knew from 15 years of friendship, since before careers, since before New York. Since the two of them had been barely 20 and splitting a studio apartment in Brooklyn and working double shifts to pay rent. Charlotte had not knocked. She had stood there for exactly as long as it took her nervous system to receive the information, process it, and make a decision, which was approximately 3 seconds. Then she left. She had waited, all through yesterday afternoon, for the information to rearrange itself into something that hurt less. She had provided herself with reasonable alternative explanations in the way that a person who knows they are doing something self-destructive continues doing it anyway. Maybe she had misheard, maybe the sentence was longer, maybe context would redeem it, but she had heard his voice too many times across too many rooms for too many years to doubt what she had heard. She knew how he spoke when he was certain about something. He had been certain. And Victoria, Victoria, who had been calling Charlotte every other week for the past 2 months, telling her to pay closer attention to the way Vincent looked at her, insisting with that particular maddening brightness of someone who believes they can see what you cannot. Victoria had laughed. The two people she trusted most in her life. The understanding had arrived not as a crash, but as a slow, dignified settling of stone, the way a building doesn't collapse so much as decide it has been standing long enough. She was not going to be the woman who fell apart in a professional environment. She was going to finish the gala. And then she was going to leave. Vincent noticed something was wrong by Wednesday. She knew this because he started appearing in the outer office more frequently than his schedule required, standing at the coffee machine for slightly too long, finding administrative reasons to pass by her desk, asking questions about the gala preparation in a tone that was somehow more careful than his usual efficiency demanded. He was watching her, not suspiciously, not coldly, with the particular quality of attention he reserved for situations he could not immediately diagnose. He asked her, on Wednesday afternoon, whether the Westfield seating conflict had been resolved. "Already handled," she said without looking up from her monitor. "I moved Senator Hartley's table to position 9 and contacted his office about the adjustment. They confirmed." Good. He didn't leave. "The floral arrangement budget came in under projection. We saved $4,000 and redistributed it to the Foundation's children's literacy allocation for the evening." A pause. "Charlotte." She looked up. This was the third thing that had changed. She had stopped meeting his eyes in the small, involuntary way she used to, the reflexive glance and hold that she had, until Tuesday, never really examined as anything other than professional attentiveness. Yes? Her voice was completely neutral. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not categorize, which was unusual. She could categorize most of his expressions after 3 years. "Nothing," he said finally. "Good work on the budget." He went back to his office. She stared at her monitor and did not move for approximately 30 seconds. Then she pulled up the resignation letter draft and added 2 sentences. Victoria called her on Thursday night. Charlotte let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Just Victoria saying she was thinking about her, that she hoped she was sleeping enough, that they should have dinner soon, her voice doing the specific thing it did when she was keeping something back. A careful brightness that had a slightly too deliberate quality, like a person walking slowly over ice. Charlotte did not call back. There was a version of herself, the one from 2 weeks ago, before Tuesday, who would have called back immediately, who would have been sitting on her couch with takeout within the hour, who would have told Victoria everything and listened to Victoria tell her she was catastrophizing. But that version of herself had been operating on the assumption that her best friend was her ally in this particular emotional geography. She didn't know what Victoria was now. She knew what she had heard. She knew what Vincent's voice sounded like when it was not performing certainty, but simply containing it, the way some men are simply sure about things without needing the room to validate them. She knew what a woman who is happy about a proposal sounds like. On Friday, Vincent called a senior staff meeting that ran 40 minutes over schedule. Charlotte sat at the far end of the conference table and took notes and provided 3 pieces of information that redirected the conversation productively. And twice she caught him looking at her from the other end of the table with an expression that was starting to acquire a specific gravity she recognized. Not suspicion, not frustration, but something closer to worry. He was actually worried. She found this briefly, painfully affecting, that he could sit 6 feet away from her and worry about something he was also the cause of, without knowing either thing was true. After the meeting, Marco Vitale, Vincent's most senior consigliere and the only man in the organization who had consistently treated Charlotte as a professional peer rather than a logistical convenience, fell in to step beside her in the hallway. "You doing all right?" he asked, quietly enough that it didn't carry. "Of course." She kept her pace even. "Long week." Marco had a talent for agreeing with statements in ways that communicated he wasn't agreeing at all. "You know, the boss has asked me 3 times this week if I know what's going on with you." She stopped walking, turned to look at him. Marco was 62 and had seen enough of the DeLuca family's interior life to know when to speak plainly and when to maintain total ignorance. And he was looking at her now with the expression of a man who was doing the former. "And what did you tell him?" she asked. "That I didn't know." He paused. "Which is true." "Good," she said. "Keep it that way." She left him in the hallway and returned to her desk and sat down and spent 4 minutes doing nothing except breathing at a rate she consciously controlled because losing composure in DeLuca Tower was not something Charlotte Hayes did, had never done, would not do now of all times. The gala was in 3 days. The ring existed. She did not know this. In the inside pocket of a jacket hanging in Vincent's private wardrobe, in a small velvet box that had been sitting there for 6 weeks, was a ring that a jeweler on 57th Street had spent 2 months crafting to a specification so precise that the man had told Vincent, half-jokingly, that whoever she was must know exactly what she wanted. Vincent had said she probably didn't know he'd been paying attention. The jeweler had found this sad and romantic in approximately equal measure. Charlotte knew none of this. She knew only what she had heard, and what she had heard had been 6 words, and those 6 words had been enough. By Saturday, 2 days before the gala, she had the resignation letter printed. She folded it twice, placed it in an envelope, wrote nothing on the outside, and put it in her evening clutch. She would leave it on his desk after the gala. Or give it to Marco. She hadn't decided yet which was more dignified. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror that night in the dress she had purchased for the event 3 weeks ago. Deep green silk, simple and clean, the kind of dress that required a woman to be certain of herself rather than hiding behind decoration. And she looked at herself for a long time. She had given this man 3 years. 3 years of competence and loyalty and every skill she possessed, plus the one thing she had never signed over and never announced. The private, irreversible fact of caring about someone more than your own comfort requires. She had done her job. She had done it well. She had not expected anything in return, which was either emotional maturity or the particular self-deception of someone who tells themselves they want nothing because wanting something specific feels too dangerous. But she had, quietly, without ever admitting it to the room, she had hoped. She turned off the bathroom light. She went to bed. She did not sleep. In his penthouse across the city, Vincent DeLuca sat on the edge of his desk in the dark with his phone in his hand and Marco's number on the screen, and he sat there for a long time without pressing call, because there was only one thing he wanted to ask, and he had asked it 4 times already this week, and the answer was always the same. Something was wrong with Charlotte, and he didn't know how to fix something when he didn't know what had broken. He put the phone down. He looked at the jacket on the chair across the room. 2 more days. He just needed to get to Monday night. He was almost certain, if he could just get to Monday night, that everything was going to be fine. He was wrong about that, but not in the way he thought. Sunday arrived the way bad days often do, not with thunder or obvious signs, but with pale, flat light through half-closed blinds, and the particular quiet that feels less like peace and more like something holding its breath. Charlotte was up at 5:30. She hadn't slept past 4. She had lain in the dark for 90 minutes, listening to the city outside her window. Do what the city always did. Traffic moving, something distant, a siren 3 blocks east that faded before it resolved into anything. And somewhere around 5:15, she had accepted that the ceiling was not going to give her anything useful and got up. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen counter in an old sweatshirt and bare feet and drank half of it before it was cool enough to drink comfortably, which burned the inside of her mouth, which she barely registered. The green dress was hanging on the back of her closet door. She had put it there last night so it wouldn't crease. Force of habit. She looked at it for a moment and then deliberately looked away. One more day. She opened her laptop and pulled up the gala's master coordination sheet. 47 line items, every one of them green. She had built the thing from scratch in February, back when the world still made a certain amount of sense, back when her worst professional anxiety was whether the foundation's new catering vendor could manage an event at this scale. She scrolled through it slowly, not checking anything, just looking. The way you look at something you built when you're trying to remind yourself that you are capable of completing things, that you finish what you start. She closed the laptop. She went back to bed and stared at the ceiling until 7, and then she got up again and started the actual day. Vincent called her at 9:17. She looked at the screen. His name, his direct line, not the office main, which meant this was not about scheduling or documents or anything that could be technically justified as work. She answered on the 3rd ring, which was 1 ring later than her usual response time, a difference so small it was barely measurable and yet felt to her like an act of enormous deliberateness. "Good morning." Her voice was even. "Where are we on the security arrangements for tomorrow night?" He sounded like he had been up for a while. His voice had that particular flatness it got when he was running on less sleep than he needed and had decided not to acknowledge it. "Finalized Thursday," she said. "Donahue's team confirmed yesterday. 16 personnel, 3 access points, standard clearance protocol for the VIP tier. I also coordinated with the venue's own security chief. There's a briefing at 4 tomorrow afternoon. I want to be there for that briefing. I'll add it to your schedule." Silence. Not the productive kind. The kind where someone is deciding how much further to go. "Charlotte?" "Yes." "Are you—" He stopped. She heard him breathe out. "Is everything set for tomorrow, from your end?" It was not really the question he had started to ask. They both knew it. "Everything is set," she said. "Okay." Another pause. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Of course." She hung up and set the phone face down on the counter and stood very still for a moment with her hand flat against the cool surface of it. He was watching her from a distance, and she was watching him from a distance, and in between them was a silence built on 6 words that neither of them was going to address, because he didn't know she had heard them, and she couldn't admit she had without also admitting everything else. She picked the phone back up, opened Victoria's contact, stared at it, put the phone down. No. She had been turning this over for 5 days. 5 days of replaying it, of providing herself with alternative explanations, of waking at 4 in the morning with the specific clarity that only comes from sleep deprivation and grief. And every time she arrived at the same place, she knew what she had heard. She knew Vincent's voice. She had spent 3 years learning the specific grammar of how he communicated certainty, and he had been certain. She was not going to call Victoria and let Victoria talk her out of what she had heard with her own ears and her own body, in the corridor outside his office on a Tuesday afternoon. She was done being talked out of things. Victoria, at that precise moment, was 11 blocks away, sitting at her own kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, staring at her phone with the expression of someone losing a very slow argument with herself. She had not spoken to Charlotte since Tuesday. She had tried. The voicemail, 2 text messages, a third that she had typed and deleted because it said too much without saying enough. She could feel Charlotte pulling away with the particular quiet efficiency that Charlotte deployed when she had already made a decision and didn't want anyone interfering with the execution of it. Something had happened. Victoria did not know exactly what, but she had spent 15 years being Charlotte Hayes' closest friend, which meant she had a working understanding of what Charlotte's silence cost her. It wasn't natural. It wasn't easy. It was the kind of silence Charlotte maintained through sheer structural will, and it always signaled that something had gotten past her defenses, and she was rebuilding them fast and high. The problem was that Victoria knew something Charlotte didn't. She had known it for 2 months. Vincent had brought her into it carefully, methodically, the way he approached everything he actually cared about. Not dramatically, not with grand speeches, but with the focused specificity of a man who had been thinking about something for a long time and had finally decided to act. He had sat across from her at a corner table in a restaurant far enough from Midtown that no one from the organization would see them, and he had told her what he was planning, and he had asked for her help with one specific thing. He wanted to know how to reach Charlotte's family. Her parents were in Connecticut, her mother still in the house where Charlotte had grown up, her father retired from a 30-year career in municipal engineering, both of them carrying the quiet pride of parents who watched their daughter build something serious out of pure competence and determination. Vincent needed her mother's phone number and her father's schedule, and he needed it kept completely quiet because the proposal was supposed to happen at the gala and the family was going to be there, and Charlotte was not going to know any of it until she was standing in that ballroom. Victoria had given him everything he asked for, and she had kept her mouth shut for 8 weeks, which was, she was now realizing, possibly the worst decision she had made in 15 years of friendship. Because something had shifted in Charlotte this week, something structural, not just a bad day, and Victoria was sitting at her kitchen table running through every possible explanation and landing with increasing dread on the one that scared her most. Charlotte had found out somehow, had found out the wrong way, and whatever she thought she knew was not what was actually true. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. She could not tell Charlotte. She had promised Vincent, and the promise mattered, not because she was afraid of Vincent DeLuca, but because she understood what he had built, and she had agreed to be part of it, and breaking it now without knowing what Charlotte actually knew felt like potentially making something worse. But staying silent also felt, increasingly, like watching someone walk toward a door she didn't know was locked. She pressed call. Charlotte's phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. "Hey," Victoria said. Her voice came out less steady than she wanted. "I know you're busy with the gala tomorrow. I need to see you this week. After, okay? Call me." She paused. "Please." She hung up, stared at the phone. Pressed call again, this time on a different contact. Vincent answered on the second ring. "Victoria." "Something's wrong with Charlotte," she said. A beat of silence. Then, "I know." "How long have you known?" "Since Wednesday." His voice was controlled, but she had been around him enough to hear what was underneath it. "I've had 3 separate conversations this week trying to figure out what happened. Nobody knows anything." "Have you talked to her directly?" "I've tried." The way he said it, flat, frustrated, with a specific weight that was not his usual register, told her more than the words did. "She's perfectly professional. She answers every question. She just..." A pause. "It's like talking to someone who's already half gone." Victoria closed her eyes. "Vincent?" "What?" She called. She stopped herself. Recalibrated. She did not know what Charlotte knew. She could not say something specific without knowing what she was responding to. "I think something happened. I don't know what. But I think she may have misunderstood something." Silence. "Misunderstood what?" His voice was careful now. "I don't know exactly, but I think you need to talk to her. Not about the gala, not about work. Actually talk to her. A longer silence. Tomorrow night, he said. Vincent, Victoria. His voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It just landed differently. I have spent 6 months building tomorrow night. I'm asking you to hold 24 more hours. She wanted to tell him 24 hours might be too long. She wanted to say that Charlotte's silences had weight to them, that what she was describing was not ordinary tension, but the kind of withdrawal that happened when Charlotte Hayes had made an irreversible internal decision and was simply waiting for the appropriate moment to execute it. Instead, she said, "Okay," because she had already made one decision about this that she now wasn't sure was right, and making another one without better information felt like exactly the kind of thing that turned misunderstandings into disasters. "Okay," she said again, "but talk to her." She hung up and sat in her cold kitchen for a long time. Monday came in gray and purposeful. Charlotte arrived at DeLuca Tower at 7. The gala started at 7 in the evening, which gave her 12 hours of final coordination, vendor check-ins, venue walkthrough at noon, the security briefing at 4, and somewhere in between all of that, the task of getting herself dressed and composed and present in a room full of powerful people who would expect her to be the calm, competent center of an event she had built from nothing. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. She would be good at it today. The morning ran on logistics, 3 separate phone calls with the venue coordinator, a last-minute substitution in the string quartet when the second violinist called in sick, and she sourced a replacement within 40 minutes through a contact she had cultivated 2 years ago, specifically because these things happened. A brief and pointed conversation with the florist about centerpiece heights that were blocking sightlines at the VIP tables. Vincent was in a meeting when she arrived and did not emerge until nearly 10. He stopped at her desk. She looked up. He looked. She noticed this before she could stop herself noticing. Tired. Not professionally tired, not the managed fatigue of a man running a demanding operation, but the kind of tired that lived behind the eyes. He was wearing a suit she had seen before, dark navy, and his tie was slightly off-center in a way he hadn't caught yet. She almost said something about the tie. She didn't. "Venue walk through at noon," she said instead. "I'll have the car ready at 11:30. I'm coming." I figured. He looked at her for a moment. "Good work this morning. Marco told me about the quartet situation. It wasn't a significant problem. Most people would have made it one." She didn't respond to that. She returned to her monitor. After a moment, she heard him move away, back toward his office, and she exhaled quietly through her nose and kept working. The walkthrough was where it started coming apart. Not catastrophically, not in ways that would be visible to anyone else in the room. But Charlotte and Vincent had spent 3 years moving through spaces together. Meetings, events, negotiations, the 101 occasions that required them to be professionally adjacent for hours at a time, and she knew the specific quality of his attention. She knew when he was actually surveying a room for security or logistical concerns, and when he was doing something else entirely. At the venue, he followed her through every section of the ballroom, the stage, the seating arrangement, the reception area, and he asked appropriate, intelligent questions about the setup, and twice he spoke to members of Donahue's advance team about positioning. All of this was correct. All of this was what should have been happening. But he kept ending up near her, not dramatically, not in ways she could have called out, just present consistently in her peripheral vision, taking up the space just to her left or right, in a way that felt less like professional coordination and more like something she couldn't name without also naming everything she was trying not to name. At the far end of the ballroom, near the stage, he stopped beside her. "The podium placement," he said, you moved it from last year. Center left, better sight lines from the main tables, and the foundation's new camera setup needs the angle. Smart. She made a note on her tablet. "Thank you." "Charlotte." His voice dropped, not dramatically, just lower, closer to something real. "Are you happy here?" She went very still. "I'm sorry?" "Here, in this job." He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the stage, which somehow made it worse. The question delivered sideways, like he couldn't quite commit to asking it head on. "I've noticed, over the past week, that something has changed. I don't know what. I've asked, and I haven't gotten an answer that means anything, and I'm—" He stopped, started again. "I need to know if there's something I should have done differently." The envelope was in her bag. She could feel it from 3 feet away, the specific weight of folded paper and made decisions, and the particular exhaustion of caring about something you cannot keep. "Everything is fine," she said. "The event tonight will run without problems." "That's not what I asked." "I know." She looked at him directly. She owed him that much. "Everything is fine, Vincent." It was the first time in 3 years that she had said something to him she knew was completely untrue. She watched something move across his face. Not a flinch, not anger, something quieter than either of those things. Something that landed and stayed. He nodded once, slowly, and looked back at the stage. 4 o'clock briefing, he said. "Yes." "I'll be there." They stood 6 inches apart in the empty ballroom with 12 chandeliers above them and 400 chairs arranged in perfect rows around them, and the distance between them felt enormous. The security briefing at 4 ran 38 minutes. Vincent was focused and precise. He pushed back on 2 positioning decisions from Donohue's team, proposed a modification to the access protocol for the East Corridor, and signed off on the final clearance list without hesitation. Charlotte sat across the table and took notes, and thought about the fact that this was probably the last professional meeting she would ever sit through with him. Afterward, walking back through the service corridor, Marco fell into step beside her. He had that look again, the careful, eyes-forward look of a man who had decided to say something. "You know," he said, conversationally, as though continuing a discussion they hadn't been having, "in 23 years with this family, I've watched that man walk away from a lot of things. Territory disputes, bad partnerships, people who pushed him the wrong direction." He paused. "I've never seen him walk away from something that mattered." Charlotte kept walking. "Marco, I'm just saying." "Please don't." He went quiet for a few steps. Then, "Whatever you think you know, make sure you actually know it." She stopped. He stopped beside her. "What does that mean?" she asked. He looked at her, steady, no performance in it. "It means that sometimes we hear a thing, and we fill in the rest with our own fear instead of the facts." She stared at him. He knew something. She could see it. Not what he knew, but the shape of knowing, the careful way someone moves around information they have decided not to deliver directly. He was telling her without telling her. He was drawing a border and standing on his side of it. "Marco." Her voice was low. "What do you know?" "Nothing I'm in a position to share." He met her eyes without flinching. "But I'll tell you this for free. You should hear the whole sentence before you make the decision you're planning to make." Her chest tightened. He turned and walked back the way they had come, unhurried, hands in his pockets, the way men move when they believe they have done what they could. Charlotte stood in the service corridor under fluorescent light with her tablet under one arm and the weight of his words doing something she could not immediately process. The whole sentence. She turned the phrase over. It sat strangely. It had the quality of something specific, not a general piece of wisdom but a directed one, aimed at a particular gap in a particular story. She started walking again. She kept walking until she reached the car, and she got in, and she rode back to her apartment in silence, and she stood in her kitchen for 4 minutes without moving. Then she went to get ready, because it was too late now. It didn't matter what Marco thought he was hinting at. She had made her decision, she had made it cleanly, and she had the letter in the envelope, and she knew who she was, and she was not the kind of woman who changed course because someone spoke to her in a corridor with the deliberate vagueness of a man protecting someone else's secret. She was going to the gala. She was going to do her job. She was going to say goodbye. She put on the green dress. She stood at the mirror and did the small, precise rituals. The earrings, the single line of product through her hair, the particular shade of lipstick she wore to professional events because it was composed without being cold. She looked at herself and thought, "You are 31 years old, and you are good at your job, and your heart is broken, and you are going to walk into that ballroom, and you are going to hold it together until it is over." She looked back at herself. She picked up the clutch with the letter inside. She left. The ballroom, by 7:15, was everything she had built it to be. A room that looked like it had always existed at this level of polish. Nothing visibly constructed about it. The way genuinely good event coordination erases itself behind the result. Senators and financiers and foundation board members, and people whose names Charlotte recognized from newspapers, and people whose names she recognized from Vincent's private call logs, that she was not supposed to have memorized but had, because that was the kind of attention she paid. She moved through the room on professional autopilot, troubleshooting without being asked, redirecting a catering snarl near the East Service entrance before it reached the floor, exchanging brief, composed greetings with half a dozen guests who had learned over the years that the woman beside Vincent DeLuca was worth knowing. She saw Vincent across the room. He was talking with a pair of Foundation board members near the bar, his body angled slightly toward the door. She recognized that posture. He did it when he was monitoring a room, when the conversation happening in front of him was the secondary conversation and he was tracking something else. He looked. She made herself observe this clinically, the way she tried to observe everything about him now, from behind glass. He looked present in a way he sometimes didn't at events. Alert without being sharp, like a man waiting for a specific moment. She looked away, found her position near the event coordinator's station, and started checking in on the program timeline. 45 minutes in, she saw Victoria. This was not expected. Charlotte had managed the guest list herself. She knew every name on it. Victoria Collins was not a foundation donor, was not a political figure, was not a business contact. She was Charlotte's best friend, and Charlotte had not put her on the list because it had not occurred to her to do so, and because the gala was a professional event and the two categories had always existed separately in her life. Victoria was standing near the entrance in a dark blue dress, looking around the room with the particular expression of someone who is trying to find a specific person without appearing to be searching. Her eyes moved across the ballroom in a systematic sweep, south wall, center floor, north. And then they landed on Charlotte, and something crossed her face that wasn't quite relief, and wasn't quite guilt, and wasn't quite either of those things. Charlotte walked toward her. "What are you doing here?" she said quietly when she reached her. Not hostile, genuinely asking. Victoria looked at her. "Charlotte, you're not on the list." "I know, Vincent." She stopped, started again. Her hands were doing the thing they did when she was trying to be careful with words, a small, contained movement near her waist. "I was invited. I need to tell you something." Charlotte's grip on the tablet tightened by a degree. "Not tonight." "Charlotte, please." "Victoria." She kept her voice completely level. "I have 300 guests in this room and a program starting in 12 minutes. Whatever you need to say to me, it can wait." Victoria stared at her. "It really can't." "It will have to." She turned and walked back toward the coordinator's station, and she did not look back, and she could feel Victoria's eyes on her the entire way, and she kept her spine straight and her pace even, and she thought, one more hour, just one more hour. From across the room, Vincent had seen the exchange. He had watched Charlotte walk toward Victoria, watched whatever passed between them, watched Charlotte walk away. He couldn't hear it, couldn't read it from this distance. But he saw Charlotte's back, the particular set of her shoulders, the way she moved through the crowd afterward with the controlled efficiency of someone who was working very hard at not feeling something specific. He pulled out his phone, opened Victoria's message thread, typed, "Is she okay?" The reply came in under 30 seconds. "She doesn't know. She thinks she knows something, but she doesn't know. Talk to her after the speech. Don't wait." He read the message twice, then a third time. He put the phone away. He looked across the ballroom at Charlotte, who was standing at the coordinator's station with her tablet and her green dress and her absolutely impenetrable professional composure, and he thought about 6 months of planning and a ring in his jacket pocket and a room full of people who had come here tonight for one specific reason that she didn't know about. And then he looked at her face, just for a moment, from a distance, when she didn't know he was looking, and he saw something in it that he hadn't let himself name until now, a quality of careful, deliberate endurance that had nothing to do with event logistics and everything to do with a person who had decided something privately and was carrying the weight of it alone. He did not know what she had decided, but Marco had come to him that afternoon. He had stood in Vincent's office with his hands in his pockets and said, quietly and without preamble, "She's leaving. I don't know when, I don't know how, but she's made up her mind. Whatever you're planning, tonight matters more than you think." Vincent had not responded. Marco had nodded and left. And Vincent had stood at his window and looked at the city for a long time, and he had thought about the conversation, the one in his office last Tuesday, the one with Victoria, the one about the proposal, the one where he had said the words he had been rehearsing for weeks. He thought about all the things he had not said to Charlotte directly. The years of proximity, the 1,000 small daily moments that had accumulated into something he had never been articulate enough, or honest enough, or brave enough, whichever failure it actually was, to name to her face. He had thought, when he planned the proposal, that the grand gesture was the solution to his own silence, that the right moment in the right room with the right ring would do what he had spent 3 years not doing. It would say it, finally and completely, in a way that couldn't be misread. He had not considered that she might not be in the room when the moment came. He had not considered that she might be in the process of leaving. The program started at 8. Charlotte ran the timeline from the coordinator's station. Introduction, foundation video, board chair remarks, donor recognition segment, and then Vincent's speech. 42 minutes of programming that she had sequenced with the precision of someone who understood that the feeling of an evening is built in half-minute increments, that pacing is not an aesthetic choice but an emotional one, that a room full of people needs to arrive somewhere together. She watched the room arrive there. And then the board chair stepped back from the podium, and the applause settled, and Vincent walked to the stage. He looked out at the room. His prepared remarks were on the podium. 3 pages, double-spaced, reviewed and approved. He looked at them for approximately 4 seconds. Then he looked up. He set the pages aside. Charlotte noticed immediately from the coordinator's station. She went still. He began speaking without notes, about the foundation, about its origin, about the year his father had started the charitable arm of the family's business, with the specific intention of putting money into communities the family had taken it from, a detail Vincent almost never discussed publicly. And the room had a particular quality of attention now, the kind that happens when a powerful person says something they have not calculated. And then he shifted. He started talking about someone. He didn't use a name, not yet. He talked about the person who ran the thing, who had taken his father's institution and turned it into something that actually worked, who had organized this room and this evening and 100 rooms and evenings before it, who had done it with the kind of competence that other people spend entire careers chasing and never quite reaching. Charlotte understood, with a slow, clarifying horror, that he was talking about her. She took a step backward from the coordinator's station. He was going to announce it. He was going to stand up there and announce that Victoria was going to be, that that the two of them were, she couldn't be here for this. She physically could not stand in this room and listen to Vincent DeLuca describe his future with Victoria Collins while wearing the dress she had bought 3 weeks ago and carrying the resignation letter in her clutch, and keep her face neutral and stay professional and be who she was supposed to be. She turned toward the back of the ballroom. She started walking. She was almost to the rear exit when the voice from the stage stopped. And in the silence that followed, absolute, total, the silence of 300 people hearing something that made them hold their breath, she heard her name. Charlotte. She stopped walking. The word hung in the air of the ballroom like something physical. She heard from behind her the sound of someone stepping down from a stage. She stopped walking, but she did not turn around. 300 people in a room that had gone completely silent, and Charlotte Hayes stood with her back to all of them, her hand 6 inches from the exit door, her clutch pressed against her side with the resignation letter inside it, and she made herself breathe. One breath, just one, through her nose and out, because the alternative was falling apart in public, which she was not going to do. Vincent's footsteps on the stage stairs were audible in the silence, measured, not rushing. She turned around. She did not know why she turned around. Some reflex older than her professional training, older than the 3 years of careful management she had built around whatever she felt for him. She turned because he had said her name, and her body answered before her mind could stop it. He was standing at the base of the stage steps. The room was absolutely still. 300 people watching. The foundation board chair with his hands folded. The catering staff frozen near the east wall. Victoria, somewhere in the back of the room, visible at the edge of Charlotte's peripheral vision. Blue dress, one hand pressed to her mouth. Vincent looked at her across the ballroom. Not at the room, not at the crowd. At her. "Why are you leaving?" His voice carried easily in the silence. Not amplified, but he had stepped away from the microphone. But the room's acoustics, the same acoustics she had considered when repositioning the podium 2 weeks ago, brought it to every corner cleanly. Charlotte felt the color leave her face. She stopped. She had no professional framing for this. There was no version of this moment that fit inside her job description. "I needed some air." "You were leaving the event." Not accusatory. Flat. like a man naming a fact before the conversation about the fact can begin. Vincent? Her voice stayed level through pure physical effort. There are 300 guests. They can wait. He crossed the ballroom toward her. Not fast, not slow. The deliberate pace of a man who had made a decision and was not reconsidering it. You cannot. She watched him come toward her and thought, with the specific clarity of someone whose nervous system has exceeded its capacity for managed feeling. This is the worst possible moment for this conversation, in the worst possible room, with the worst possible audience. He stopped 6 feet from her. Up close, she could see what the distance had hidden. The set of his jaw, the quality of his eyes, which were not performing calm, but actually were calm in the way deep water is calm, not absence of force, but presence of it, contained. I heard you, she said. Her voice came out lower than she intended, just above the level that would carry to the nearest tables. I need you to know that, before you say anything. I heard you. Something shifted in his face. What did you hear? Tuesday. She kept her chin level. She owed herself that. Your office. I was bringing the Hartley documents, and the door was open, and I heard you. She held his gaze. I heard everything I needed to hear. He was quiet for 3 seconds. She counted them. What did you hear? He asked again, slower. That she will become your future wife. The words came out clean. She had rehearsed them, privately, approximately 40 times. She had not expected to say them here, in public, in front of everyone he knew, but they came out clean, and she kept her eyes on him. I heard you tell Victoria. I heard her laugh. I didn't need to hear the rest. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Vincent looked at her. Something was happening in his expression that she could not categorize. Not the expression she knew, not the professional register or the strategic calm or even the rare unguarded moments she had caught over 3 years when he forgot, for half a second, to be who he presented himself as being. This was something else. Something that started in his eyes and moved outward. He said, Charlotte, don't. She felt her composure developing a crack, fine as a hairline but structural, and she pressed her hand tighter against the clutch. Please don't try to explain it away. I know what I heard. You heard 6 words, he said. It was enough. It wasn't. His voice didn't rise. It was half a sentence. She stared at him. From the back of the room, Victoria moved. Charlotte saw her in peripheral vision, crossing the ballroom floor, blue dress, both hands now at her sides. Her face carrying the expression of someone who has been waiting to say something for a very long time and has finally run out of time to keep waiting. She reached them. She stood between them, which took a particular kind of courage in that room, in that moment, with Vincent DeLuca 6 feet away and 300 witnesses, and the weight of 8 weeks of kept silence finally becoming something that could not be kept anymore. Charlotte, Victoria said. Charlotte looked at her. The look was not warm. I need to tell you something, Victoria said, and I need you to actually listen to me, which I know you are physically capable of because I have watched you sit through 6-hour legal briefings without losing focus once. She took a breath. What he said? On Tuesday. The sentence you heard. I know what I heard, Victoria. You heard the end of it. Victoria's voice was steady, but her hands weren't quite. You walked away before the beginning. Charlotte said nothing. He said. Victoria stopped, looked at Vincent briefly, looked back. He said, help me introduce my future wife. Tell Charlotte she will become my future wife when I finally ask her. She paused. Let that land. The whole sentence, Charlotte. That was the whole sentence. The ballroom stayed silent. Charlotte stood very still. She heard the words. She processed the words. She ran them against the memory, the corridor, the half-open door, the quality of his voice that she had spent 3 years learning to interpret, and she felt something begin happening in her chest that was not a feeling she had a clean name for, something that sat between devastation and the particular agony of understanding that you destroyed something with your own certainty. That's not... She stopped, restarted. Her voice had lost some of its evenness. That's not what I heard. Because you only heard the last part, Victoria said. Because you turned around before the beginning. Charlotte looked at her, looked at Vincent, looked at her best friend, who was standing in front of 300 people with her hands unsteady and her eyes completely dry in the effortful way of someone holding tears back through sheer will, and said, You knew. You knew all along. Yes. And you didn't tell me. Victoria's jaw tightened. I promised him. The crack in Charlotte's composure widened. You let me spend a week. Her voice stayed low, but the control in it cost her visibly. You let me spend a week believing... She stopped, pressed her lips together. I called you, Victoria. I sent you a voicemail. I was... She stopped again. I know, Victoria said. I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't know exactly what you thought you'd heard until tonight. I knew something was wrong. I kept trying. You knew enough. Charlotte's voice came out sharper than she intended, sharper than she had let anything come out in the past week. You knew I was pulling away, and you knew there was something wrong, and you knew what he was planning, and you kept his secret. A pause. You chose his secret over telling me the truth. Victoria didn't flinch from this. Yes, she said, and I was wrong. The admission landed in the silence between them. Charlotte looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Vincent. I was watching her with the careful, absolute attention of a man who had stopped trying to control the situation and was simply in it, present without strategy, which was the most genuinely undefended she had ever seen him. She thought about the week, the 5 days, the 4 a.m. ceilings and the coffee she burned her mouth on, and the resignation letter she had drafted and folded and carried in an envelope in her clutch to a black-tie charity gala, because she was the kind of person who finished what she started, even when what she was finishing was her own goodbye. She thought about Marco in the corridor. Hear the whole sentence. She thought about the voicemail Victoria had left. I need to see you, please. She thought about the way Vincent had ended up near her during the venue walkthrough, consistently, not dramatically, just present, like someone who didn't know how to say a thing and so kept positioning himself near it and hoping proximity would do what language hadn't. She opened her clutch. Her fingers found the envelope. She held it for a moment without removing it. How long? She said. Her voice was quiet now. The sharp edge gone, replaced with something rawer. How long were you planning this? Vincent answered without hesitating. 6 months. She closed her eyes. Just for a second. 6 months. The ring has been in my office for 6 weeks. Your parents are in this room. Your mother, your father, your brother. I called your mother in April. He said this evenly, not defensively, just laying it flat. I've been carrying this since February, Charlotte. The timing, I was waiting for tonight. I thought... He stopped. The pause was uncharacteristic. She had heard him pause before, but not like this. Not with this particular quality of a man running up against the edge of what he knows how to say. I thought a perfect moment would do what I hadn't been saying for 3 years. I was wrong about that too. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that the room began to have the quality of held breath, long enough that the nearest table of guests had completely stopped pretending not to watch, long enough that the Foundation's event photographer, who had been stationed near the stage for the program, lowered his camera and just stood there. She pulled the envelope out of her clutch. She looked at it. Vincent's eyes went to it. Something moved across his face. Charlotte, don't. She shook her head slightly, not hostile, something else. I just need a minute. He went quiet. She held the envelope in both hands, this thing she had made from grief and certainty and 5 sleepless days of building herself a future that didn't include him, this clean and professional farewell she had composed with the care she brought to everything, and she looked at it, and she thought about the woman who had written it. That woman had been so sure. That woman had heard 6 words and built an entire architecture of loss around them, had done it quietly and efficiently in the way she did everything, had not asked a single follow-up question or picked up the phone or walked back to that office door and knocked. She had been so sure she knew what she had heard, and she had been so afraid of being wrong that she had never checked. Her hands were not steady, so became aware, distantly, that she was standing in front of 300 people with unsteady hands and a face that was no longer doing the work she had trained it to do. That whatever composure she had managed to carry through the ballroom, through the past week, through the venue walkthrough and the security briefing and the 12 hours of gala preparation, it was not going to hold for much longer. She looked up at Vincent. My parents are here, she said. Not a question. Yes. You called my mother in April. Yes. And you've had a ring in your office for 6 weeks. Yes. She felt something break open in her chest. Not violently, not dramatically, but the way a window breaks under pressure. The whole thing at once, clean and irreversible. I wrote you a resignation letter, she said. Something moved in his eyes. I figured. I was going to leave it on your desk tonight. I know. How do you know? Because you finish things, he said. Even things that hurt you. It's one of the... He stopped. His jaw worked slightly. It's one of the things I should have said to you a long time ago, instead of waiting for the right room and the right moment and the right setup. He looked at her, and the look had nothing professional left in it. I'm sorry. For the silence, for all of it, for making you carry something alone that you should never have been carrying alone. Charlotte's throat tightened. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. She was going to cry. She was going to cry in front of 300 people at the DeLuca Foundation annual gala, in the dress she had bought 3 weeks ago, standing next to her best friend, and the man she had loved quietly for 3 years without ever saying it, and she was going to do it because she was human, and she was exhausted, and the thing she had spent a week believing had just been taken apart, word by word, in a ballroom she had built, and she had no reserves left. She pressed her lips together hard. She did not cry. Not yet. Because something else was happening, something she felt before she fully understood it, a shift in the emotional logic of the moment, a reordering. She had spent 5 days in grief, and now grief was not the correct container for what she was feeling, and the new thing did not have a clean name yet, but it was large and complicated, and it had teeth. She looked at Victoria. You should have told me, she said. Yes, Victoria said. I should have. I trusted you. I know. I called you. Her voice cracked on this slightly, just enough to be audible to the two people standing directly in front of her. I needed you, and you had the information, and you kept it because he asked you to. Victoria's composure was fraying visibly now. Charlotte, I'm not... Charlotte stopped, breathed. I'm not saying I don't understand why. I'm saying it hurt. That's all. It hurt. She looked at her best friend. You're still my best friend. That is not what this is about. I just need you to know it hurt. Victoria pressed her fingers against her mouth, nodded. Charlotte looked back at Vincent. He was watching her with the expression she had not been able to categorize before. She could categorize it now. It was the expression of a man who has spent a significant amount of his life being feared and a much smaller amount of his life being known. And he was standing in the middle of the difference between those two things, in public, without armor. I need to know something, Charlotte said. Anything. Why didn't you just tell me? Her voice was even now, not cold but stripped down, the way things sound when there's nothing left to perform. Not the proposal. Before the proposal. Why didn't you just... She stopped. Found the words. I have been in that office with you for 3 years. 3 years. And you waited. You planned a grand gesture. You organized a room and a ring and a guest list. She gestured slightly at the ballroom around them. Why couldn't you just say it to me, plainly, in a hallway, on a Tuesday? The room was so quiet she could hear the flicker of a candle at the nearest table. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. Because you're the only person I have ever been afraid of losing, he said, and that made me stupid. The crack became something else. Charlotte felt the tears arrive. Not a flood, not a collapse, just the specific heat of something that has been held back for too long finally finding the edge. She blinked. Once. Twice. She looked down at the envelope. She thought about everything she had built in the past week from 6 incomplete words. The sleepless nights. The carefully drafted goodbye. The green dress she had almost not bought because buying it felt like hoping, and hoping felt dangerous. She had been so careful not to hope. She had been so careful, and she had still gotten hurt, and it had still been built on nothing real, on half a sentence, and her own fear, and the specific cowardice of a person who would rather interpret loss from a distance than risk being wrong up close. She had not knocked on the door. She could have knocked on the door. She had heard 6 words and she had turned around and walked away and spent 5 days building a world out of them. And not once in 5 days, had she asked. Because asking would have meant admitting she had been listening. And admitting she had been listening would have meant admitting why. The envelope was in her hands. She looked at it. She looked at Vincent, who was 6 feet away from her in a navy suit with a slightly off-center tie that she had noticed that morning and not corrected, who had a ring in his pocket that he had carried for 6 weeks, who had called her mother in April. She thought, "You have spent 3 years being careful. You have been so careful." And careful got you a week of grief built on 6 words and a resignation letter you wrote at 5 in the morning in an old sweatshirt. And then she thought, you could be wrong about the wrong thing. She looked at the envelope one more time. Then she looked at him. "I need to know something else," she said. "Ask me." "The ring." She held his gaze. "Is it still? Do you still?" She stopped, rebuilt. "After this week, after watching me pull away from you without knowing why, after whatever Marco told you and whatever Victoria told you, and standing up at that podium and setting aside your prepared remarks in front of 300 people. Her voice was completely steady now, steadier than it had been since Tuesday, because she was asking the real question, and the real question had a gravity to it that organized everything else. "Is the question still the same?" He reached into his jacket. He removed the velvet box. He held it in his hand, not opening it, just holding it, letting her see it, this thing he had been carrying for 6 weeks. "Yes," he said. Charlotte looked at the box in his hand. She looked at his face. And then something happened that nobody in the ballroom expected. Least of all Charlotte Hayes, who had spent 3 years being the most composed woman in any room she entered, who had managed million-dollar events and confidential negotiations, and every variety of professional pressure that Vincent DeLuca's world generated, who had folded her grief into an envelope and carried it in a clutch to a charity gala, and told herself she was finished. She laughed. Not hysterically, not brokenly. A real laugh, surprised out of her, the kind that arrives when the accumulated absurdity of a situation finally outweighs everything else. The week, the sleepless nights, the burned coffee, Marco in the corridor telling her to hear the whole sentence, her parents somewhere in this room that she had spent 11 months organizing, the ring in the velvet box, the fact that she was standing here with her mascara threatening and her composure in pieces and a resignation letter in her hands at what was supposed to be the most important charity event on the DeLuca Foundation's calendar. She laughed, and Vincent looked at her, and something shifted in his face. Not relief exactly, something larger than relief, something that had been locked up and was now in the process of not being locked up anymore. "You carried it for 6 weeks, she said. "Yes." "You called my mother." "In April." "She didn't tell me. I asked her not to. She kept a secret from me for 4 months. She really wanted me to ask you in person." Charlotte shook her head slightly. The laugh was fading, but what replaced it was something she had not felt in a week, something warm and complicated and exhausted and completely real. She looked at the envelope in her hand. She looked at the box in his. She looked at the 300 people who had been completely still for the better part of 10 minutes, in a room she had spent 11 months building, including, somewhere in the back, her parents, who had come to New York from Connecticut for a reason they knew and she hadn't, and her mother had kept that secret for 4 months, and her father was probably standing somewhere with his arms crossed, looking at Vincent DeLuca with the particular expression of a man whose daughter is his professional equal, and he knows it, and he is deciding how he feels about the man in front of her. She thought about all of this. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took her to understand that the week she had just survived, the grief and the sleepless nights, and the careful, devastating goodbye she had written and rewritten, had not been caused by what she thought it had been caused by. It had been caused by 6 words, half a sentence. At the beginning she had not stayed to hear. She looked down at the envelope. She ran her thumb across the seal. And then Charlotte Hayes, who had spent 3 years being the most capable woman in any room she entered and the most quietly heartbroken woman in every room that contained Vincent DeLuca, did something that took more courage than everything else she had done that week combined. She tore the envelope open. She removed the letter. She held it for a moment. 3 years of competence, 3 years of careful professional love, 3 years of wanting something she had convinced herself she wasn't allowed to want, folded into 2 printed pages and an envelope to want, folded into 2 printed pages and an envelope she had addressed to no one. She tore it. Once, twice, a third time. Small pieces, letting them fall from her hands to the ballroom floor she had specified down to the tile pattern, confetti made from her own carefully worded goodbye. The room exhaled. Somewhere near the back, someone began to applaud. Just one person, then 2, and then the kind of applause that builds. Not because it is prompted, but because 300 people have been watching something true happen in front of them, and the body responds to truth before the mind catches up. Charlotte stood in the middle of it and looked at Vincent, who was looking back at her with the box still in his hand and his expression completely open in a way she had never seen from him before. Not once in 3 years, not in any room they had shared. "I'm not done being angry," she said. "I know. About the silence, about the 6 months, about the fact that Marco knew, and Victoria knew, and apparently my mother knew, and I was the last person." "I know," he said again. "You have every right. I just tore up my resignation letter in front of everyone, you know." "I saw. That was not dignified." "I thought it was the most dignified thing I've ever seen anyone do." She looked at him. She looked at the box. She looked at the pieces of paper on the floor of her ballroom. And then she looked at Victoria, who was standing 2 feet to her left with tears running openly down her face now, not bothering to stop them. 15 years of friendship and 8 weeks of kept secrets, and the specific, exhausted relief of a woman who has been waiting for a moment to resolve and has finally watched it do so. Charlotte reached out and took Victoria's hand. She held it. She looked back at Vincent. "Put the box away," she said. He went very still. "Not..." She shook her head. "Not no, just not here, not like this." She looked at him clearly, no composure required, nothing between her and the look. "Not in front of everyone, not as part of an event I organized." She felt something in her chest that was the opposite of closure, something opening rather than closing, something that needed space rather than ceremony. "Ask me when it's just us. Ask me when there's nothing to perform and no audience, and you're not pulling the box out because you've already planned the moment." She held his gaze. "Ask me when you're just asking." Vincent looked at her for a long moment. He put the box back in his pocket. He nodded once, and then he said, quietly, just to her, not to the room, "I've been afraid of just asking for 3 years." "I know," she said. "So have I." And that was the most honest thing either of them had said in 3 years, said in the middle of a ballroom, at a charity gala in front of 300 witnesses, said by 2 people who had been circling something for a very long time, and had finally, through misunderstanding and silence and half a sentence in a corridor, arrived at the place where circling was no longer an option. The applause was still going. Charlotte looked out at the room. The foundation board members, the senators, the business figures, the catering staff who had gone completely still near the east wall, her parents somewhere in the back of it all. And she thought, I built this room. And then she thought, I have absolutely no idea what happens next. But she was still standing in it, and so was he. And for the first time in a week, that felt like enough. The applause was still going when the first problem arrived. Charlotte heard it before she saw it. A shift in the quality of the room, a ripple moving through the crowd near the east entrance. The specific change in ambient noise that happens when something is wrong in a space full of people who don't yet know how wrong it is. She felt it the way she felt everything in a room she'd built, instinctively, in the body, before the brain had caught up with the data. She turned. Donahue was moving across the ballroom floor at a pace that was 3 degrees faster than his standard operational walk. He was heading for Vincent, and his face was doing the thing faces do when the news is bad, and the timing is catastrophic, and there is no good way to deliver either of those facts. Vincent had already seen him. Charlotte watched Vincent's posture change, not dramatically, not visibly, to anyone who didn't know the specific vocabulary of how he held himself, but she knew it. The openness that had been in him 30 seconds ago pulled back like a tide. Something older and harder moved in behind it. The man who had stood in front of 300 people and said, I've been afraid of just asking for 3 years, was still there, but he had company now. Donahue reached him and leaned close. Charlotte could not hear what was said. She watched Vincent's jaw set. She watched his eyes move, left, toward the north corridor, then back to Donahue, then briefly, for exactly 1 second, to her. He crossed to her in 4 strides. I need 10 minutes, he said. Low, just for her. What happened? Nothing that's going to ruin tonight. He said it with the specific conviction of someone who is deciding something is true while he says it. Keep the program moving. The dessert service should start. Vincent, she kept her voice even. What happened? He looked at her. The look lasted exactly as long as it took him to make a decision about honesty versus operational efficiency, which in Vincent DeLuca's particular calculus had historically been a short contest. Ricci, he said. She knew the name. She had typed it into documents and call logs and meeting schedules for 3 years without ever being told the full shape of what it meant. But she knew it the way you know the name of weather, by what it did when it arrived. Someone from his side is in the building, Vincent said. Lower level. Donahue's handling it. Then let Donahue handle it. I need to be there. You need to be here. She held his eyes. You have 300 guests, 2 senators, a foundation board that is going to remember this night for the wrong reasons if you disappear into a back corridor 20 minutes after. She stopped. Found the professional register, the one she had been operating from for 3 years. 10 minutes. I will cover 10 minutes. After that, your absence becomes a story. He looked at her for a moment longer than strictly necessary. 15. 12. Something moved in his face that was not a smile but was adjacent to one. 12. He turned and followed Donahue toward the north corridor. Charlotte turned back to the room. 300 people, some of whom had watched the last 20 minutes happen, and were now in the various states of processing that a room full of powerful, socially sophisticated adults defaults to when they've witnessed something personal in a public space. Some were conspicuously redirecting themselves toward the bar. Some were quietly discussing what they'd seen with the people at their tables. A few were watching Charlotte with the calibrated attention of people who were deciding how to position themselves relative to whatever had just shifted. She squared her shoulders. She walked to the event coordinator's station, picked up her tablet, and opened the program timeline. Dessert service, string quartet, foundation fund commitment segment, closing remarks. She found the head of catering near the East Service entrance and said, "Start the dessert service now, please. Full room." "We're about 6 minutes early." "I know. Start now." She moved through the room. She stopped at 3 tables in succession, exchanging 4 sentences with each group. Warm, precise, just enough to re-anchor the social gravity of the evening to something that felt intentional rather than interrupted. She reached the foundation board chair and spent 90 seconds confirming that the fund commitment segment would proceed as scheduled, which it would, and by the time she had covered the room's north half, the dessert carts were moving and the string quartet had picked back up, and the particular human tendency to normalize quickly had begun doing its work. She was passing the bar when she nearly walked into her mother. Eleanor Hayes was 63, had run the PTA of 3 separate schools with the efficient authority of a woman who would have been running corporations if the decade she'd come up in had offered the same doors, and she was standing at the edge of the bar area with a glass of white wine and an expression that Charlotte had been reading since childhood, the expression that meant she was watching her daughter work and was proud in a way she wouldn't say directly because directness about pride was not how Eleanor Hayes operated. Charlotte stopped. "Mom." Her voice came out slightly different than she intended, smaller. You came." "Vincent called me in April," Eleanor said. "I wasn't going to say no to that. He told me." "Did he tell you what he said to me?" She tilted her head slightly. "He said, 'Mrs. Hayes, I'm going to ask your daughter to marry me, and I thought you should hear it from me directly, and I wanted to know if you'd be willing to come to New York in October.' And then he waited. And I said, 'What took you so long?'" She paused. "And he said I was being stupid, and I said, 'Yes, you were,' and then I booked the train tickets." Charlotte stood in the middle of her charity gala and felt the hairline crack from 3 hours ago finish its journey through whatever had been holding everything together. "You didn't tell me," she said. "He asked me not to. For 4 months." "Charlotte." Her mother's voice was not unkind. It had never been unkind, even when it was delivering things Charlotte didn't want to hear. "I have watched you manage everything around you for your entire adult life. I have watched you make yourself indispensable and professional and completely self-sufficient, and I have been proud of you every single day." She paused. "But you have never, not once since you were 19 years old, let anyone take care of something for you." She met her daughter's eyes. "He wanted to take care of this one. I thought he deserved the chance." Charlotte's throat was very tight. "I wrote a resignation letter," she said. "I was going to leave tonight." Her mother looked at her for a moment. "I know." "How do you know?" "Because you're my daughter, and when you decide you've lost something, you don't wait around to find out if you're wrong. You start making arrangements. She reached out and briefly, firmly, squeezed Charlotte's arm. You've always moved too fast toward the exit. Charlotte looked at her mother. She looked at this woman who had kept a 4-month secret and booked a train ticket from Connecticut and was standing in a Manhattan ballroom in what was clearly a deliberately chosen dress. And she thought, I have been surrounded by people who knew things I didn't, and every single one of them was trying to protect something they believed was worth protecting. That did not make the week less terrible, but it made it explicable. Your father is near the stage, her mother said. He has been watching that young man very carefully for the past hour, and he hasn't said anything negative yet, which from your father is essentially a standing ovation. Charlotte laughed, short, involuntary. Where? And then the north corridor door opened, and Vincent came back through it. He was 12 minutes and 40 seconds. She clocked it without meaning to. And he came back into the ballroom moving at his normal pace, which told her nothing had escalated, and Donahue was not behind him, which told her it had been handled, and his jacket was straight, and his face was composed, but his tie was now slightly more off-center than it had been before he left, which told her the 12 minutes had involved something physical. His eyes found her across the room immediately. She excused herself from her mother and crossed toward him, meeting him near the central aisle between the seated tables. Handled? She asked. Handled. He paused. Donahue had 2 of his people already in position. It was a probe, Ricci's side-testing response time. Did anyone see? No. He glanced around the room, registered the dessert service, the quartet, the smoothly running event. Something in his face shifted. You kept it moving. That's what I do. He looked at her. The look had the same quality it had carried 20 minutes ago, before Donahue, before the North Corridor, that new openness, still there underneath the operational layer. Your mother found you, he said. Yes. And? And she told me she said yes, you were to you in April and then booked a train ticket. She was very direct. She's always very direct. You called her in April and didn't think I would recognize where I get it from? She watched something ease in his face. My father is near the stage being terrifyingly quiet. I know, I spoke with him when they arrived. A beat. He shook my hand and said, I hope you understand what you're asking for. And I said yes. And he said, I'll decide if I believe you by the end of the night. Charlotte stared at him. He said that. Verbatim. He didn't tell me that story either. Nobody in your life appears to have told you anything for the past 4 months. He said this evenly, without irony, just stating the shape of it. No, she said. They didn't. She looked at him. I'm going to need some time with that. I know. Not, she shook her head, not a withdrawal, not what this past week was. Just time to process it. I'll give you whatever you need. That's what you said about 12 minutes, and it turned into 12:40. He looked at her. I'm noting, she said, that when you say you'll give me something, I may need to specify the unit of measurement. The look in his face was not quite a smile and was not quite something heavier than a smile, and she could not decide which way it was going to land. Fair, he said. They stood in the middle of the ballroom while the event ran around them, and the guests ate dessert, and the string quartet played something clean and undemanding, and the foundation board chair was moving toward the podium for the fund commitment segment, and for approximately 45 seconds, Vincent DeLuca and Charlotte Hayes simply stood next to each other in a room full of people and said nothing. It was the first comfortable silence they had shared in a week. It was, Charlotte thought, also the first silence between them she had ever experienced without the low-grade anxiety of not knowing what was in it. She knew what was in it now. She turned back to the room. I need to coordinate the fund segment. Go. The closing remarks, yours, are in 12 minutes. I know. Don't abandon them this time. I abandoned the prepared remarks, he said. The remarks still happened. The remarks caused a public emotional incident. The remarks resolved a private emotional incident. She looked at him sideways. We are going to argue about whether that was worth it. Probably, he said, but not tonight. She went back to work. The fund commitment segment ran cleanly. 3 major donors confirmed contributions that together exceeded the foundation's annual target by 19%, and the board chair's face had the specific radiance of a man whose year has just been made, and the applause in the room was the kind generated by genuine satisfaction rather than social obligation. Charlotte stood at the coordinator's station and ran the closing timeline and watched the event arrive at its conclusion with the particular feeling of a thing landing exactly where you built it to land, and she thought, I made this. And for the first time all evening, she let herself feel that cleanly, without the shadow of the letter and the clutch and what she had been planning to do after. She was still here. Vincent's closing remarks were 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He stayed with the prepared text this time. He spoke about the Foundation's mission and the year's achievements and the community programs that would receive the night's donations. And he was precise and warm in the measured way he was capable of when he chose to be. And at the end he said, "Thank you for being here, and thank you for your extraordinary patience this evening." Scattered laughter, genuine. The event closed at 10:17. The guest exodus took 40 minutes, goodbyes, final conversations, the slow dispersal of a room full of people who had somewhere else to be but were reluctant to leave. Charlotte moved through it running the standard post-event logistics, vendor wrap-up, equipment check, a brief conversation with the venue coordinator about the catering balance invoice, a handoff to the Foundation's operations manager on the follow-up donor correspondence. By 11 o'clock, the ballroom was half empty. Her parents found her near the stage while she was confirming with the head of the string quartet about equipment retrieval. Her father, Robert Hayes, was 66 and had spent 30 years doing work that required precision and patience and the ability to see how things were put together, and he had the quiet authority of a man who did not need to raise his voice to be heard. He was looking at Charlotte the way he looked at things he was deciding about. Not approving, not disapproving, just seeing. He hugged her first, which surprised her and held on slightly longer than his usual. "Good event," he said when he stepped back. "Thank you." The man, he stopped, restarted. "He came and found us when we arrived. He shook my hand and he looked at me directly and he said, 'I should have done this differently, and I understand if you have questions.' And I didn't have questions. I had one question." He paused. I asked him, "Does she know you? Does she actually know you, or does she know the version you show people?" Charlotte went still. What did he say? He said, "I think she might be the only person who does." Her father's expression didn't change much, but something shifted slightly behind it. And then I watched him stand in front of 300 people and take his jacket off, metaphorically speaking, in a way I've never seen a man like that do in public. "So?" He looked at her. He answered the question better with that than with anything he said. Charlotte breathed. "Dad, you're allowed to be happy," he said. Just that. Flat, direct, the specific language of a man who loves efficiently and means everything he says. "You've been careful long enough." Her mother put an arm around her briefly, the contained warmth of a woman who knew when words were less than the gesture, and then they said their good nights and found their coats and were gone. Charlotte stood near the stage in the emptying ballroom. The chandeliers had been dimmed from gala brightness to the flatter light of venue cleanup. The catering staff was moving in their efficient post-event patterns. The string quartet's equipment was being broken down near the north wall. Pieces of torn paper from her resignation letter were still on the floor near where she had stood, and she had not told anyone to clean them up, and nobody had, and they sat there in the low light like the aftermath of something. She looked at them for a moment. She reached down and gathered the pieces. She didn't know why exactly. Not sentimentality, not as a keepsake, just the particular reflex of a person who finishes things, who doesn't leave messes in spaces she has built. She held the pieces in her palm. "I'm going to need a new job description," she said without turning around. She had known he was there. She had known it for 30 seconds. The quality of air in a room changes when Vincent DeLuca is in it, and she had spent 3 years learning the specific change without ever directly acknowledging that she had. He came to stand beside her. He looked at the pieces of paper in her hand. "What do you want it to say?" he asked. "Something accurate." She turned the fragment slightly. "Not executive secretary, not whatever the organizational chart would call." She stopped. "Something that says, this person keeps everything running and also knows where all the bodies are buried and has decided to stay anyway." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a long title." "I'll abbreviate it." He looked at her profile. She could feel it the way she had always been able to feel it. His attention, which had weight to it, which was not the generic attention of a man looking at a woman, but the specific gravity of someone who was actually seeing you and had been for a long time. Charlotte. I know, she said. I haven't asked anything. You were going to say something about the ring. I was going to say something about the week. He paused. About what it felt like to watch you pull away from me and not be able to reach you. About sitting in my office at 4 a.m. on Saturday, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong and coming up with nothing, because I didn't know what you'd heard and you didn't tell me, and He stopped. I am not good at this. Saying things plainly. It is genuinely one of my worst characteristics, and I have many. She looked at him. I know, she said. I have a list. His jaw moved. Not quite. Of my worst characteristics. 3 years of proximity. You accumulate data. She turned to face him properly. The room was nearly empty now. A few staff members on the far side. The venue coordinator near the entrance. Nobody within 30 feet. You are impatient with people who can't follow your reasoning as fast as you produce it. You don't sleep enough, and you compensate by working, which means you're operating below optimal cognitive function approximately 40% of the time, and you won't admit it. You make decisions that affect other people without telling those people in advance. She paused. And you are terrible at saying simple things. He looked at her. That is an accurate list, he said. I know. Do you have a corresponding list of my own? She raised her eyebrows slightly. I heard half a sentence and I built a catastrophe out of it, and I didn't ask a single question, and I wrote a resignation letter at 5 a.m. and carried it to a public event in my clutch. She paused. I am also not good at asking for things, or believing I'm allowed to want them. She held his eyes. We are both, it turns out, quite bad at this. Yes, he said, which is going to be a problem. Probably. I'm stating this clearly, she said, because I think we have both spent a significant amount of time in this particular dynamic, the one where we are standing 3 feet from the thing we want, and we are managing it instead of just saying it, and I would like to try a different approach going forward. What approach? Saying it. She held his gaze. When something is wrong, saying it. When something is needed, asking for it. When something is... She stopped, found the words. When something matters, saying it matters, out loud, to the person it matters about. He was watching her with an intensity that had nothing managed in it. I can try that, he said. You're going to have to do more than try. I know. Because I'm not going to survive another week like this one. Her voice was steady, but she meant it fully. I am a competent professional, and I am a functional adult, and I have significant personal reserves, and I spent that week operating at the absolute bottom of all of them, and I am not willing to do it again because we are both too... She searched for the word. Careful. We are too careful with each other. He said, You're right. She looked at him for a long moment. Say something true, she said. Not about the proposal, not about tonight. Something true that you haven't said. He didn't hesitate. The first time I knew, he said, was about 3 months after you started. There was a meeting, the Carlucci acquisition negotiation. It went 6 hours. The other side had a strategy of attrition, just grinding it out until we conceded on the secondary clause. And everyone in the room was starting to fold except you. You hadn't said anything for 40 minutes. And then you quietly put a single document in front of their lead counsel, and you said, This supersedes the secondary clause you're negotiating over. It was addressed in the original filing, which your team appears to have missed. And the room went completely silent, and their counsel looked at the document and turned the color of someone whose day has just ended. He paused. And you just picked up your pen and moved on. And I thought... He stopped. I thought, I have never seen anything like this person. Charlotte stood in the dimmed ballroom and felt the impact of this like something physical. 3 months in, she said, Yes. You have known for 3 years. I have known for 3 years. And you didn't say anything for 3 years. No. She looked at him. She was not going to perform calm about this. She had made a decision, standing in this room 20 minutes ago, that she was done performing calm about things that were not calm. That is infuriating, she said. Yes. I wasted 3 years being... She stopped. restarted. I was so careful. I was so careful not to feel it too obviously, not to let it show, not to be the cliché of the secretary who falls for, I managed it every single day for 3 years, and you were sitting 6 feet away knowing, and you didn't say anything. No, he said. I didn't. Why? Not accusing, actually asking. Because I was afraid, he said, and because I convinced myself that afraid was the same as not ready, and because every time I got close to saying it, the voice in my head that runs risk assessment on everything, he stopped, said, if you're wrong, you lose her, and losing her was worse than staying silent. He met her eyes. I was wrong about that too. She looked at him. You were wrong about that, she agreed. Staying silent almost lost me anyway, just slower. I know. Marco told me to hear the whole sentence, she said, in a service corridor this afternoon. He said, sometimes we hear a thing and we fill in the rest with our own fear. Marco is occasionally smarter than me. Marco is frequently smarter than you. He breathed out, something that was not quite a laugh and was not quite a sigh. Also possibly accurate. She looked down at the pieces of paper in her hand. She held them for a moment. Then she walked to the nearest waste bin at the edge of the room and dropped them in. She turned back. He was watching her. I want to go home, she said. I want to go home and sleep for approximately 10 hours, and then I want to have a conversation that is not in public and does not involve an audience of 300 people. She paused. And then I want to figure out what comes next. Okay, he said. Not tonight. Not tonight. She studied him. You're very agreeable right now. I am in a position that warrants it. Don't be agreeable because you're in a position that warrants it. Be honest. If you disagree with me, say so. He looked at her steadily. I don't disagree with you. About anything? About anything you've said in the last 20 minutes. A pause. There are other topics where, obviously, we'll get there. She found her clutch on the coordinator's station. The envelope was gone. The pieces were in the bin. The clutch felt lighter. Walk me out. He fell into step beside her. They crossed the emptying ballroom, past the catering carts and the stacked chairs from the perimeter and the venue staff running post-event cleanup, past the place near the rear exit where she had been standing when he said her name, and the whole evening had changed direction. At the main entrance, her coat was waiting. She had checked it at the start of the evening with the precision of someone who accounted for all variables, and the coat check attendant produced it without being asked. Vincent held it for her. She paused. This was not a thing he had done before, not because he was incapable of it. He was capable of most things, but because the specific register of their professional relationship had not included it, the small gestures of care that existed outside organizational hierarchy, the things that happened between people rather than between roles. She turned and let him put the coat around her shoulders. She stood very still while he did it. His hands settled the coat at her shoulders and stayed there for a half-second longer than the task required. She turned to face him. They were in the entrance of a venue that was winding down, and the city was outside through the glass doors, all light and movement and October cold. And she was looking at him in a way she had never allowed herself to look at him in 3 years of standing in the same rooms. I'm not going to make this easy for you, she said. I'm not asking you to. I mean it. The 3 years of silence. I'm going to have feelings about that. Complicated feelings. And I'm going to say them when I have them because that is the approach we just agreed on. I know. And the Victoria situation, I'm going to need to have a long conversation with her about the 8 weeks and the voicemails and the, I know. And my mother knew for 4 months. Charlotte. His voice was quiet. Not interrupting, just landing. I know, all of it. I am not going anywhere. She looked at him. She believed him. This was the thing, she realized. The specific, clarifying thing that had been underneath all of it. The reason the week had been so devastating. The reason 6 words had been enough to undo 3 years. She had believed on some deep, unexamined level that if she was wrong, if she had been wrong about being loved, the correct response was to leave efficiently and professionally and without making a scene. She had not been able to imagine being wrong and staying. Being wrong and asking. Being wrong and having it turn out to be the beginning of something rather than the end. She had not let herself believe he was not going anywhere. She believed it now. The entrance doors opened behind her, a gust of October air, cold and clean, from the street outside. From the ballroom behind them, a door opened. Marco, coming through it in his coat, unhurried, hands in his pockets. He stopped when he saw them. He looked at Vincent. He looked at Charlotte. He read the room in approximately 2 seconds, the way he read all rooms. He nodded once. Not to Vincent, to her. She nodded back. He went through the entrance doors without a word, into the city. Charlotte looked at Vincent. I need to handle the final vendor sign-off, she said. 15 minutes. I'll wait. You don't have to, Charlotte. He held her gaze. I'll wait. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned and went back into the ballroom because there was work to finish, because she always finished things, because that was who she was. And for the first time in 3 years, she did not feel the specific loneliness of finishing something in a room he occupied but didn't see her in. He saw her. She had always known it, somewhere beneath the management and the careful distance. She knew it fully now. She worked her way through the final sign-offs, catering, venue coordinator, equipment retrieval confirmation, a brief exchange with the foundation's operations manager about the morning's follow-up calls. 14 minutes and 20 seconds. She came back through the main ballroom doors, and he was where he said he would be. Not sitting, not leaning, not performing patience, just standing near the entrance with his hands at his sides, his jacket slightly creased from the evening, his tie still off-center. She stopped in front of him. She reached up and straightened his tie. He went completely still while she did it. That absolute stillness he was capable of, the kind that was not absence of attention, but total concentration of it, directed without deflection. She smoothed the knot, settled the collar. She stepped back. She looked at him. And the thing she felt in that moment, standing in the entrance of a venue she had built, with the cold city behind the glass doors and the sound of cleanup behind her, and the pieces of her resignation letter in a wastebin 10 feet away, was not relief, not triumph, not the simple satisfaction of a resolution. It was something larger and more complicated and less comfortable than any of those things. It was the specific feeling of a future that has just become real. She picked up her clutch. She nodded toward the door. He pushed it open. They walked out together into the October night, into the cold and the light and the noise of the city that did not pause for personal reckonings. And the door closed behind them, and somewhere in the building they had just left, a wastebin held the pieces of a letter that had been built on half a sentence, and the particular courage of a woman who had been afraid to hope and had hoped anyway, in spite of everything. 3 steps from the entrance, Vincent stopped. She stopped beside him. He was looking at the street in front of them, cars moving, a cluster of guests from the evening 50 yards up the block, making their way to whatever came next, the city doing what it always did. 6 months ago, he said quietly, not looking at her, looking at the street. When I started planning this, I wrote down what I wanted to say to you. He stopped. When I actually asked, not the proposal speech, not the public version, what I wanted to say when it was just us. She waited. He turned to look at her. I wanted to say, you are the only person in my life who has never needed me to be who I am in public, who has seen every version of this, the operations, the politics, the compromises, the things that don't look good in daylight, and has chosen every day to walk back into the building, not because she had to, because she chose to. He held her eyes. And I have spent 3 years watching you choose this, and being grateful for it, and being a coward about saying so, and I am finished being a coward. Charlotte stood on the sidewalk outside the DeLuca Foundation gala, in her green dress and her coat and the October cold, and she thought, you were so careful. You were so careful not to hope for exactly this. And here it is anyway. Ask me, she said. He reached into his jacket. He stopped. His hand came out empty. He was looking at something over her shoulder. She turned. Donahue was on the sidewalk 20 feet back, moving fast, his phone in his hand, his face with the look it had worn in the ballroom 2 hours ago, except sharper now, the look of a situation that has escalated past probe into something with actual stakes. He reached them. We have a problem, he said. He was looking at Vincent, not at Charlotte, but he didn't ask her to step away, which told her something. The man from earlier, he wasn't alone. There are 3 of them and they're not interested in leaving. Where? Vincent said. His voice had shifted completely. Not louder, not harder, just different in its register, the change that happened when he moved from one mode to the other. 2 blocks north. Donahue's jaw was set. They came back with paperwork, something Ricci's lawyers filed today, an injunction application on the Foundation's primary real estate holdings. They're serving it tonight, timed for after the gala, so it hits the news cycle with maximum visibility. He paused. It's not real, but it doesn't need to be. If it gets reported before legal can respond, the Foundation's donor commitments from tonight, the ones that haven't been officially transferred yet, they pull. 3 of the 4 will pull. Vincent's expression did not change. He looked at Donahue for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at Charlotte. She had already understood the shape of the problem. The transfer documents, she said, from tonight's commitments, where are they? Foundation's operations manager has the physical copies, Donahue said. Digital versions are in the system, but the official execution needs to be completed and filed before the injunction application can be registered, Charlotte said. Once the transfers are formally executed, the injunction has nothing to attach to. She was already opening her clutch for her phone. What time did they file? 7:43 p.m. She looked at her watch. It's 11:08. Depending on the jurisdiction and the filing judge, we have a window. Legal is unreachable, Donahue said. I've called twice. It's Sunday night. I know who is reachable. She was dialing before she finished the sentence. The Foundation has a fiduciary council, separate from DeLuca Legal, specifically because Foundation assets are structured independently. His name is William Hartley, and I have his emergency line because I set it up 2 years ago in exactly this kind of scenario, and I am the only person in this organization who remembers that it exists. She put the phone to her ear. Vincent looked at her. She met his eyes while the line rang. 1 ring, 2, 3. Hartley. A voice, alert despite the hour, the voice of a man who has taken enough late-night calls to have stopped being surprised by them. Mr. Hartley, it's Charlotte Hayes from the DeLuca Foundation. I apologize for the hour. We have a time-sensitive fiduciary situation, and I need to walk you through it right now. A pause. Talk. She talked. She laid it out in clean, precise sequence. The gala, the commitments, the amounts, the Ricci filing, the timeline window, what needed to happen, and in what order. She talked for 90 seconds without stopping. She watched Vincent watching her while she did it, and she watched Donahue watching her, and she felt the particular familiar sensation of being useful in a crisis, which was different from being needed but not entirely separate from it. The transfer documents, Hartley said when she stopped. Who has physical custody? Foundation operations manager. He's still in the building. Get them to me, not scanned, original execution copies. I need to be standing in front of a notary with those documents in the next 40 minutes, or the window closes. I know a notary, Charlotte said. 22 blocks from your office. I'll call ahead. Hartley made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Of course you do. Call me back in 5 minutes with confirmation. He hung up. She lowered the phone. She looked at Vincent. I need to go back inside, she said. I need the operations manager and a car in 45 minutes. He looked at her for one long moment. This woman in a green dress in October cold, with her phone in her hand and her resignation letter in a waste bin inside, and a job that apparently still needed doing, and his expression had something in it that was beyond what she had seen in the ballroom, something she was going to need better language for eventually. Take my car, he said. I'll take mine. Charlotte, I'm not, she said very clearly, going to start this whatever this is by taking your car when I have a perfectly functional car. She was already turning back toward the entrance. Go deal with the people 2 blocks north. Don't do anything that ends up in a newspaper. I will call you when Hartley has the documents. She was halfway to the door. Charlotte. She turned. I was standing on the sidewalk in the city light, jacket slightly creased, tie straight now, looking at her with the box still in his pocket, and 3 years and 6 months and a single unfinished conversation between them. When this is done, he said. When this is done, she agreed. She went back inside. The operations manager's name was Gerald Foss, and he had been running the Foundation's administrative operations for 11 years, which meant he had seen enough late-night crises to move without asking unnecessary questions when Charlotte walked back into the ballroom at 11:12 and told him she needed the transfer documents from tonight's commitments, all 4 of them, physical copies, right now. He had them in a leather portfolio under the coordinator's table. He had put them there at the start of the evening as standard protocol. Charlotte had written that protocol. She took the portfolio, called the notary, a woman named Diane Sheff, who ran a service on the West Side and had been on Charlotte's emergency contact list for 2 years because document execution crises did not observe business hours, confirmed availability, called Hartley back with the address, and was in her car heading north by 11:19. The drive took 11 minutes. She sat in the back seat with the portfolio on her lap and her phone in her hand and ran through the logic of it, checking for gaps the way she checked everything, methodically, without panic, because panic was a luxury you burned through in the first 30 seconds, and then you either had the training to work without it or you didn't. The Ricci filing was, as Hartley had said, technically weak. An injunction application on Foundation Real Estate Holdings required demonstrating that the Foundation had engaged in conduct that materially harmed Ricci's documented interests, and the basis for that claim was thin enough that any competent judge reviewing it on the merits would deny it inside of 72 hours. The problem was not the merits. The problem was the timing. Ricci's lawyers had filed on a Sunday night specifically, so the application would sit in the system uncontested through the night and into Monday morning, when the financial press ran their early cycle. 48 hours of reportage about an injunction application against the DeLuca Foundation would pull donor commitments before legal could respond with the paperwork demonstrating the claim was garbage. But if the transfer documents were formally executed and filed before the application was registered in the morning queue, there was nothing for the injunction to attach to. The Foundation's primary real estate holdings were structured through a separate fiduciary trust, Hartley's domain, not DeLuca Legal's, and the trust's execution protocols operated on a different timeline than the family's organizational machinery. Ricci's lawyers had not known about the trust structure. Charlotte knew about it because she had spent 3 years reading every document that passed through Vincent DeLuca's office, including the ones that arrived in the quiet periods between crises, the administrative and structural ones that nobody prioritized because there was always something louder demanding attention, and she had filed the trust structure information in her memory the way she filed everything, without knowing exactly when she would need it, but understanding that the day she needed it would come. The day had come. Hartley was waiting on the sidewalk outside the notary's building when her car arrived. He was 61, compact, wearing a coat over what appeared to be pajama pants, and he had the expression of a man who had accepted the evening for what it was. "You drove fast," he said. "I know the route." She held up the portfolio. He took it, opened it on the hood of a parked car under the streetlight, and spent 90 seconds reviewing the documents with the focused speed of someone who had been doing this for 30 years. "These are clean," he said. "They're always clean." 4 commitments, total transfer value. He looked at the figure. Substantial. "Yes." "And you need all 4 executed and filed before the morning registration queue opens at 6 a.m. He looked at his watch. "It's 11:31. "I know." He closed the portfolio. "Diane's going to need a witness signature on 2 of these. The trust structure requires it." "I'll witness." "You're named in one of the documents." She paused. 1 beat. "Gerald Foss. He's still at the venue?" "I'll call him." She was already dialing. "He can be here in 20 minutes. Hartley nodded. He went inside. Charlotte stood on the sidewalk and waited for Gerald to pick up. And while she waited, she looked at the city around her. The specific quality of New York at 11:30 on a Sunday night. Not quiet, never quiet, but running at a lower register than the daylight hours, the light softer and the noise more dispersed, the city doing what it always did, which was continue regardless. Gerald picked up on the second ring and said yes without being asked twice. She went inside. The notary's office was small and bright and smelled like printer toner and old wood, and Diane Sheff was at her desk in a cardigan with her glasses on, and the specific unflappable manner of someone for whom this was not the strangest Sunday night she had worked. She and Hartley were already reviewing the first document when Charlotte came through the door. It took 43 minutes. Not fast. Document execution at this level was not meant to be fast. It was meant to be accurate. And accurate required reading every clause and confirming every signature block and verifying every identity and running the notarization protocol in the specific sequence the trust required. Gerald arrived at minute 18, slightly out of breath, his bow tie from the evening still around his neck, and he witnessed the 2 documents that required it with the careful hand of a man who understood what he was signing and why it mattered. At 12:14 a.m., Hartley filed the executed documents through the Foundation's fiduciary system, a digital submission with physical copies to follow by courier in the morning, and the transfer of tonight's charitable commitments was formally complete. He looked at Charlotte across the desk. "Done," he said. She let out a breath. Not a dramatic breath, just the specific physical release of a thing she had been holding. "The injunction application," she said. "Has nothing to attach to," Hartley confirmed. "By the time the morning queue processes it, the Foundation's real estate holdings are in the executed trust and outside the claim's scope. Ricci's lawyers spent a Sunday filing something that is now effectively decorative." Gerald made a sound that was somewhere between relief and exhaustion. Charlotte stood up, picked up the portfolio, now holding copies of the executed documents, and extended her hand to Hartley. He shook it. "You know," he said, "I've been fiduciary counsel for this foundation for 7 years. In 7 years, you are the only person from the organizational side who has ever called my emergency line. I'm aware. You're also the only person who knew it existed. I set it up." "You set it up," he said, "and then you were the crisis it was set up for." He looked at her for a moment. "What happens to the foundation if you're not in that office?" She thought about this. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Something worse, probably." He nodded. "I'll send my invoice through the standard channel." "Thank you for picking up." "Thank you for calling." He paused. "And I saw the news alert about tonight. The gala." A pause. "For what it's worth." She looked at him. "People talk," he said simply, "even at 11:30 on a Sunday." She almost smiled. "Good night, Mr. Hartley." Outside, she stood on the sidewalk with the portfolio under her arm and called Vincent. He picked up before the first ring had finished. "Done?" she said. A pause. "All 4?" "All 4. Filed. Ricci's application has nothing." Another pause, this one longer, with a quality she had not heard from him before. Something that was the audible form of a tension releasing from somewhere deep. "Charlotte," he said, "don't. I wasn't going to say anything complicated. You were going to say something about the foundation and what would have happened, and I don't need to hear it tonight." She looked at the street. "Where are you?" "Outside the venue. I've been here. I told you not to wait. You told me not to take anything that ends up in a newspaper. I didn't. I waited." She pressed her lips together briefly. "The 3 men Donahue found. Gone. When the filing failed, their reason for being here evaporated. They left." "And Ricci?" "We'll hear from my lawyers by 8 a.m. and we'll understand that tonight was a significant miscalculation on his part." His voice was even. Not angry, past anger, in the territory beyond it where things become very clear and very decided. "That's a conversation for Monday. Okay? Come back." Not a request exactly. Not a command, just 2 words with the specific weight of someone saying what they mean directly, the way they have just committed to doing. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. "I'll be there in 12 minutes, she said. She was there in 10. He was standing exactly where she had left him, on the sidewalk outside the venue, his coat on now against the October cold, his hands at his sides. The street had quieted in the hour she had been gone. The last of the gala guests long since dispersed, the venue's lights dimmed behind the glass. Just the city and the cold and him, standing there. She got out of the car. She walked to him. She stopped. They were standing in the same city, on the same sidewalk, under the same October sky, as approximately 11 million other people who were living their own complicated Sundays, and none of that registered as anything except background. "Gerald is going home," she said. "He's still wearing his bow tie." "He's a good man." "He is." She looked at Vincent. "Hartley said the filing is clean. It will hold." "I know. He sent me a message." She looked at him. "He has your number?" "I'm his client. He called me when I set up the emergency line 2 years ago, and he has had that number since, and you didn't know it existed until tonight." "That is accurate, and I have feelings about it." "Good," she said. "Have feelings about it. That's the new approach." He looked at her for a long moment. The city ran behind him, all light and movement and indifferent continuity. "It's past midnight," he said. "I know. You've been working since 7 this morning, 6:30. You ran a 300-person gala, had a public emotional incident, managed a fiduciary crisis, executed 4 major transfer documents, and it is now 12:26 a.m. When you say it like that, she said, it sounds like a lot. It is a lot. It's Tuesday's work, she said. This is what Tuesday looks like. He looked at her with the expression she was going to need better language for, the one she had first seen in the ballroom and hadn't been able to name. She was starting to understand it now. It was not admiration, it was not affection, it was not even love in the simple, uncomplicated version of the word. It was all of those things, and also something else, something that looked like recognition. Like a man looking at something he has understood for a long time and is only now allowing himself to say he understands it. Ask me, she said. He reached into his pocket. He took out the box. He did not open it. He held it in his palm and looked at her and said, I have been wrong about a significant number of things in the past 3 years. I've been wrong about silence, and I've been wrong about timing, and I've been wrong about what a perfect moment means and whether waiting for one is wisdom or cowardice. He paused. But I've never been wrong about this, about you, about the fact that every version of any future I have ever tried to think through, the only one that makes any sense at all is the one where you're in it. He met her eyes. So, Charlotte Hayes, will you marry me? Not a performance, not a podium and 300 guests and a speech. Just a man on a sidewalk at 12:27 in the morning with a box in his hand and the city behind him and 3 years of accumulated truth in his voice. Charlotte looked at him. She thought about 6 months ago when he had started planning. She thought about April when he had called her mother. She thought about the ring sitting in a jacket pocket for 6 weeks. She thought about the conversation she had not stayed to finish, the 6 words she had built a catastrophe from, the resignation letter in a waste bin 40 feet behind her. She thought about 5 days of sleepless grief constructed from half a sentence. She thought about Marco in a corridor. Hear the whole sentence. She thought about her father. You've been careful long enough. She thought about her mother booking a train ticket from Connecticut because a man she had never met called her in April and said I was being stupid, and her mother had said, yes, you were. She looked at Vincent DeLuca on a sidewalk at midnight, and she thought, this is the most imperfect version of this moment imaginable. It is cold and we are both exhausted and my mascara has not survived the evening and your tie is off center again and there is no room, no audience, no camera, no ceremony of any kind. She thought, this is exactly what I asked for. Yes, she said. He opened the box. The ring caught the streetlight. Not dramatically, not cinematically, just the ordinary physics of light on a polished surface, which was enough. He took it out and she held her hand steady and he put it on. And his hands were not entirely steady either, which she noted and found unexpectedly deeply reassuring. He held her hand for a moment after. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. It fits, she said. The jeweler had your measurements. She stared at him. How did the jeweler have my measurements? You had a ring resized at a shop on 57th Street 14 months ago. I may have called them. She stood very still. You called a jewelry shop and asked for my ring size. In February. You have been planning this since February. Yes. You called my mother in April. Yes. You called a jewelry shop in February. Yes. You've had a ring in your office for 6 weeks. Yes. She looked at him. You are the most organized person I have ever met about everything except saying the actual thing out loud. That is a very accurate summary of my primary flaw. She looked at the ring on her hand. She looked at the city behind him. She looked at this man who had spent 6 months constructing the infrastructure of an answer to a question he had never asked, and she thought, we are going to drive each other genuinely insane. We are going to have arguments about silence and timing and the specific failure mode of people who are very good at everything except vulnerability, and those arguments are going to be real and complicated and not particularly dignified. She thought, good. She stepped toward him. He put his arms around her and she leaned into it, and they stood on the sidewalk outside a venue she had built while the city continued doing what it always did. Indifferent, constant, enormous. And the cold came off the October air and neither of them moved for a long time. She could feel his heartbeat through the jacket. It was not slow. Your tie is off center again, she said, against his shoulder. I'm aware. I'm not going to fix it this time. That seems like a statement of principle. It is. She stayed where she was. You can fix your own tie. I've been fixing my own tie for 34 years. You've been doing it wrong for 34 years. He made a sound in his chest that she felt rather than heard. She thought, that is a laugh. She had made Vincent DeLuca actually laugh, on a sidewalk at midnight, which she added privately to the short list of things she had done in her life that she was completely certain were good. They stood there until the cold became something that required acknowledging. She stepped back. She looked at him. I'm going home, she said. I know. I need to sleep. Yes. We are going to have a very long conversation tomorrow about the 3 years and the silence and the Victoria situation and approximately 9 other things. I know. And that conversation is going to be uncomfortable. Probably. And you're not going to like all of it. Probably not. He held her eyes. I'll be there for it. She believed him. She turned toward her car. She stopped. One more thing, she said without turning around. Ask. The job description. What about it? She turned back. I meant what I said. Not executive secretary. Not whatever the org chart says. Something that reflects what the work actually is. She looked at him. And a conversation about the compensation, because I have reviewed the Foundation's Fiduciary Council's billing rate, and I have some thoughts. He looked at her. You want a raise? I want an accurate compensation package. There's a difference. Most people don't negotiate their own engagement night. Most people aren't me. A pause. No, he said. They're not. She got in her car. She rode home through the city at 12:40 a.m. with the ring on her left hand and the portfolio on the seat beside her, and the particular complicated fullness of a day that had contained more than any single day was designed to hold. She did not try to process all of it. She let it sit. She let it be what it was, large and imperfect and entirely real. And she watched the city move past the window, and by the time she reached her building, she was not reconstructing or analyzing or planning what came next. She was just tired, in the good way, in the way that means the work got done. She went inside. She put the portfolio on her kitchen counter. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the ring in the low light of her bedroom for approximately 3 minutes, which was not a thing she would ever have admitted to doing and did anyway. Then she lay down. She slept. She slept for the first time in a week, without waking at 4 a.m. The conversation happened on Wednesday, not Monday. Monday was the Ricci response, which Vincent's lawyers filed at 8:15 and which accomplished exactly what it was designed to accomplish, which was the rapid and documented demonstration that the Sunday night filing had been not only legally insufficient, but strategically catastrophic, a move that had cost Ricci both the injunction and whatever remained of his goodwill with 2 judges who had now seen his organization operate in bad faith on a Sunday evening. Tuesday was the Foundation's donor follow-up. Charlotte spent 6 hours on calls with the 4 committed donors, walked each of them through the executed transfer documentation and the resolution of the Ricci situation, and by the end of the afternoon had received written confirmation from all 4 that their commitment stood. Gerald Foss sent her a bottle of wine. The card said, "For when you have a moment, you earned it." Wednesday morning, Charlotte walked into DeLuca Tower at her usual time. She stopped at her desk. She sat down. She opened her laptop. At 8:14, Vincent arrived. He paused at the threshold the way he always did, the half-second register of the room, and then he looked at her. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He looked at her hands, specifically at the left one, the ring. Something moved in his face. "How'd you sleep?" "Better?" She looked at him. "You?" "Better?" She closed the laptop. "I have some things to say?" He came and sat in the chair across from her desk. Not his office chair, not the power position, the chair on her side of the professional geography, the one usually occupied by whoever needed something from her. He sat down and he looked at her, and he didn't say anything, which was, she was beginning to understand, his version of paying full attention. She had thought about this for 2 days. Not structuring it, not drafting it. She had deliberately not drafted it, because some things lost something essential when they were refined too much. But she had thought about what was true and what needed to be said, and what she could not move forward without having said. "I am angry," she said. "I want to start there. Not with the misunderstanding, not with the half-sentence, with the 3 years of silence before any of it. Because you knew. You told me on Sunday night that you knew, 3 months in, and you chose not to say anything, and I need you to understand what that cost." He was quiet, listening. "I spent 3 years," she said, "managing something that I had no language for in a professional context, that I had no right to name at work, that I had every reason to believe was entirely one-sided. I was careful. I was so careful. I kept every feeling at exactly the level where it was functional, and nothing beyond that, because that was what the situation required, because I did not know there was another situation available." She held his gaze. "And you knew there was, and you didn't tell me." "Yes," he said. "That's true. I'm not asking you to explain it. I understand why. The risk calculus, I ran the same one, I just ran it from the other direction. I understand being afraid of saying something that can't be unsaid. I understand it." She paused. "I'm just telling you that it cost me something, that the years of managing it cost me something, and I need you to know that, not as an accusation, not as a debt, just as a fact between us." He looked at her steadily. "I know, and I'm sorry." She believed this too. "Good," she said. "Now, the Victoria situation." He nodded slightly. "She made a choice," Charlotte said. "I understand why she made it. You asked her to keep a secret, and she cares about you, and she believed she was protecting something worth protecting. I understand all of that. And she is still my best friend, and she will continue to be my best friend." She paused. "But 8 weeks is a long time to watch someone you love suffer and stay silent because someone else asked you to. And I told her this on Tuesday afternoon, and she agreed, and we sat in her kitchen for 2 hours and said everything that needed to be said. And it is not resolved yet, not entirely, but it is open, which is better than closed." "Good," he said. "I'm telling you this not because I need you to do anything about it, but because it involves you and you should know the status." She looked at him. "We don't keep things from each other. That is the only rule. Whatever else we figure out, the work, the structure, the job description we need to renegotiate, the one rule is that." "Agreed," he said. No hesitation. "Also," she said, "you need to tell me when something is wrong before it becomes a Sunday night crisis that requires me to call a notary at 11:30. I understand you operate with a significant amount of information compartmentalization. I understand why that's structurally necessary. But I also understand, having spent 3 years reading every document that crossed your desk, that the Ricci situation has been developing for at least 14 months, and there were 7 points in those 14 months where I could have flagged it as a foundation-level risk if I had known it was a foundation-level risk." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking to know everything. I'm asking to know the things that intersect with the work I'm responsible for." "That's reasonable?" "I know it's reasonable. I'm stating it clearly so we don't have a situation in 6 months where you've made the same judgment call again, and I'm standing on a sidewalk calling a notary." He looked at her for a moment. "You know the notary situation was not— I know it wasn't intentional. I know Ricci chose the timing. I'm saying that the information gap that made it a crisis was 14 months old, and that gap should not exist." He breathed out. "Agreed." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Are there other things?" he asked. "Probably," she said. "I'll say them when I have them." "Good." She opened her laptop. "The Hartley invoice is in the Foundation's APQ. The 4 donor confirmations are in the filing system. The Ricci response documentation is with legal for archiving. The gala final accounting closes Friday." She paused. "The job description and compensation conversation needs to happen this week. I'll have HR set up the meeting. I'll run the meeting." He looked at her. "HR will be there," she said, "but I'm going to present my own terms. It is a conflict of interest for me to negotiate with HR without you present, and it is a conflict of interest for you to negotiate without HR present. So all 3 parties will be in the room, and it will be documented and clean. You've already thought through the structure." "I've had 2 days." Something was in his face again. That look, the one she was building language for. "What?" she said. "Nothing." "Say it." He was quiet for a moment. "I spent 6 months planning a proposal. I planned the room and the ring and the guest list and the timing, and I had a speech and I rehearsed it." He paused. "And you are sitting there having managed a fiduciary crisis, completed a 5-day emotional reckoning, and already restructured the terms of our working arrangement, and it's Wednesday morning." "Yes," she said. That's accurate. He stopped. I spent 6 months on the room. You'd have spent 2 days on the structure. The room was beautiful, she said. I built it. He looked at her. The room was perfect, he said. It just turned out the proposal didn't need it. She met his eyes. No, she said. It didn't. They sat in the office in the particular silence that had changed its quality. Not the managed silence of two people maintaining professional distance. Not the loaded silence of unspoken things, but something that had air in it, that had room. Go to your office, she said. You have a 9 o'clock. He stood. He stopped at the threshold. Charlotte. She looked up. The 3 years, he said. What you said. About what it cost. I heard it. He held her gaze. I'm not going to fix it. I can't. But I heard it. She looked at him. Good, she said. He went into his office. She looked at the ring on her hand for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened her laptop and started working. The months that followed were not simple. Nothing about the specific project of building a life alongside Vincent DeLuca was simple, because he was not a simple man, and she was not a simple woman, and the intersection of two people who had spent years managing their own complexity without assistance was going to produce friction, and it did. There were arguments, real ones, not shouting, neither of them were shouters, but the kind of arguments that have weight to them, that require resolution rather than distance, that leave both parties slightly changed. They argued about information sharing twice in the first 2 months, and both times Charlotte was right, and said so, and both times Vincent acknowledged it, which was not something she had expected to be as difficult for him as it appeared it to be, and which became easier, incrementally, the way most things become easier with practice. They argued about the job, once, in November, not about the renegotiated terms, those were settled and documented and clean, but about something subtler, about the line between being the woman who ran his professional life and being the woman who was going to marry him, and whether those two things could coexist in the same space without one consuming the other. This argument lasted 3 days, in the sense that it started on a Tuesday and was not finished until Thursday evening, when they were sitting in her apartment on her couch, with the takeout going cold between them, and she said, I need the work to be mine, not yours, not ours, mine. And he said, I know. And she said, I need to know that if I walked out of that building tomorrow, I would still be the person who does the work I do. And he said, you would be. You were always going to be. And she said, then we're okay. They were okay. The Victoria situation resolved slowly, the way things between people who genuinely love each other resolve, not in a single conversation but in dozens of small ones, in the accumulated evidence of showing up, in the specific repair work of two women who had 15 years of foundation to draw on and one bad season to work through. By December, Victoria was back to calling 3 times a week, which was her default, which Charlotte had not realized she missed until it came back. Charlotte's parents came to New York for Thanksgiving. Her father shook Vincent's hand at the door and said, I've decided I believe you. And Vincent said, thank you. And her father said, don't thank me, earn it, which was, Charlotte thought, the most her father thing anyone had ever said to anyone. Her mother pulled Charlotte into the kitchen under the pretext of helping with something and said, you look different. And Charlotte said, I'm tired. And her mother said, no, not tired different, the other kind. And Charlotte looked at her mother for a moment and said, I know. And her mother smiled, the particular private smile of a woman who has been right about something and is choosing not to say so, and handed her a spoon and said, stir this. She stirred it. She was happy. Not simply, not without complication, not in the way that required ignoring the real texture of things, but genuinely, fundamentally, in the way that a person is happy when they are in the right place doing the right work with the right people and they know it without having to convince themselves. The DeLuca Foundation's annual report, released in December, showed the strongest year in the organization's history, both in charitable giving and in the legitimate business revenues that had been redirected toward community programs. Charlotte had spent 4 months working with the board on a 5-year expansion plan that would triple the foundation's reach into underserved communities in 3 boroughs. The plan had been her idea. She had presented it herself to the full board in October, 3 weeks after the gala, 2 weeks after the ring, on a Tuesday morning when Vincent had been in the room, but had not said a single word because he had understood by then that this was hers to present. The board had approved it unanimously. Gerald Foss had sent her another bottle of wine. Winter came down on the city and the year turned. And in February, 12 months after Vincent had first walked into a jewelry shop on 57th Street, Charlotte was in her office on a Saturday morning reviewing the foundation's Q1 projections when her phone rang. Victoria. She picked up. It's Saturday. I'm aware. Are you at the office? Where else? Come home. I'm outside your building. She paused. You're outside my building right now. With coffee and news. Come down. She saved the document. She put on her coat. Victoria was on the front step of Charlotte's building with 2 cups from the place 2 blocks over and an expression Charlotte recognized. The barely contained brightness of someone holding something they've been waiting to say. Charlotte took the coffee. What? I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to not make a face. I cannot promise that. I'm seeing someone. Charlotte looked at her. Don't make that face. I'm not making a face. You're making a face. I'm curious. Who? Victoria wrapped both hands around her cup. Marco. Charlotte went very still. Marco, she said. He called me in November, after the gala. He said he'd been thinking about calling since the summer and he'd decided that waiting was the wrong instinct. Victoria's chin went slightly up, the familiar gesture of someone expecting to be challenged. We've had dinner 4 times. Charlotte thought about Marco in a service corridor. Sometimes we hear a thing and we fill in the rest with our own fear instead of the facts. She thought about Marco on the sidewalk, nodding at her, the specific nod of a man who has done what he can. She thought about the fact that Marco Vitale, who had been telling people to hear the whole sentence, had apparently been sitting with something unspoken himself since the summer, and had looked at the resolution of Charlotte's story and decided he was done waiting. She looked at Victoria. He's a good man, she said. Victoria's expression shifted, the relief underneath the brightness, visible now. Yes, she said. He is. He told me to hear the whole sentence. He told me he did. He was right. He usually is. Victoria's mouth curved. Don't tell him that. His head is already a reasonable size. Charlotte looked at her best friend standing on a February sidewalk with coffee in her hands and something new and slightly terrifying in her eyes. And she felt the specific, uncomplicated warmth of watching someone you love begin something. Tell me everything, she said. Victoria told her everything. They stood on the sidewalk until the coffee went cold, and then went inside and sat at Charlotte's kitchen table and kept talking, and the morning moved through the windows the way February light moves in New York, thin and clear and persistent, and the city did what it always did, which was continue. 6 months later. In what would have been late spring if the spring had behaved like spring instead of extending summer's heat. 2 weeks into its own season, Charlotte drove a rented car along the Connecticut coast with the windows down and Vincent in the passenger seat with his jacket in the back and his sleeves rolled up, and the Atlantic was on their right, gray and enormous and entirely indifferent to personal history. And she took the turnoff she had been taking since childhood and drove until the road ended at a private stretch of coast that belonged to an estate the DeLuca family had held for 20 years. She had never brought him here before. She had never brought anyone here before. It was her place, not legally, not officially. She had no claim to it, but she had been coming here for 3 years, whenever the city became too much of itself, and she needed the specific quality of Atlantic air and the particular silence of a coast where nobody needed anything from her. She parked. They walked down to the water's edge, shoes off, cold sand and the specific smell of salt and seagrass and distance, and she stood at the edge where the water came up and receded and came up again, and she breathed it in. He stood beside her. They stood there for a while without saying anything, the way you can stand beside someone without saying anything when the silence is not a managed thing, but simply the right container for what's actually being felt. She looked at the water. She thought about 6 months ago. The ballroom, the letter, the 6 words, the corridor she had turned around in. She thought about 3 years before that, and all the mornings she had arrived 40 minutes early, and the afternoons she had managed the manageable, and the evenings she had driven home alone with her feelings filed away in their appropriate place. She thought about her father. You've been careful long enough. She looked at Vincent beside her. She looked at his hands, which were not entirely still even at rest, which she had noticed years ago and never commented on. A small, contained energy, always present, the physical evidence of a mind that did not stop. She took his hand. He looked at her. "I want to get married here," she said. "Not a big event, not 300 guests, just the people who are actually part of the story." She paused. "My parents. Victoria. Marco. Hartley, if he wants to come. Gerald Foss." She looked at him. Does that work for you?" He looked at the ocean. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She nodded. The water came in and pulled back, and the light on it shifted the way Atlantic light shifts. Never entirely the same for 2 consecutive seconds. Always moving, always adjusting, never arriving at a final version of itself. She thought, "I have spent a significant portion of my life being afraid of getting things wrong, of hearing only half the sentence and building a world from it, of turning away from a door before the whole answer arrived." She thought, "And here's what it looks like when you stay." It looked like this: a man with his sleeves rolled up and his shoes in his hand beside her, and the cold Atlantic, and a piece of coast she had been coming to alone for 3 years that was no longer somewhere she came alone. It looked like sand between her toes and the ring on her finger, and the particular exhaustion and fullness of a life that had not been careful enough to avoid being damaged, and had not been careless enough to be destroyed. It looked, she thought, exactly like something real. "You're thinking loudly," he said. "You can't hear thinking." "I can hear yours." She looked at him sideways. "What am I thinking?" He looked at the ocean for a moment, then back at her. "That it worked out." She considered this. "That it worked out," she agreed. The water came in, pulled back, came in again. They stood there until the light changed.